So thank you everyone for joining today's session on the future of tourism in the UK, looking at building for the future and supporting further growth. I'm going to just provide a very quick introduction from PPE, and then I will be handing over to our fantastic chair of the events, Lydia Rusling. So for those of you who don't know us, PPE are an independent research organisation, think tank, that produces policy briefings, conferences, interactive seminars, bringing together people from both the private and public sector on a whole range of issues, whether that is things like police discrimination, how to improve the high street, or supporting young carers. We're delighted today to be discussing tourism in the UK. So just a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, let's just go through the order of affairs. We've got 7 fantastic speakers who will each be presenting for around about 20 minutes, although Adam and Dimitrios will be co-presenting together. After each presentation, we're going to have about 5 to 10 minutes of questions and answers. Lydia, of course, will be leading that, but really we want everyone, all the attendees, getting involved with that. So, you know, please do get involved, share your own experiences on this. As I previously mentioned, the chat box is there for us to, if you do have a question, please put your question into the chat box and we can come to that. Or unmute yourself or raise your hand. There is a button to raise your hand. So, you know, use that and we can know to come to you and put your question to the speakers. Once we've concluded with the 6-7 presentations, we will then have about 30 minutes for a panel discussion. Once again, do get involved with that, share your experiences and put your questions to our fantastic panel. Just a final note on housekeeping. If you can keep your microphones muted during the presentation, as I said, you know, please feel free to unmute yourself during the Q&A portion, but certainly during the presentations, keep your microphones muted. That will just help us ensure that we can hear all the presentations very clearly. But equally, if you can keep your videos on, I think that'd be fantastic. For the speakers, I imagine there is nothing worse than doing a 20-minute presentation and staring at a bunch of black screens. So if you can turn on your video, that would be fantastic. It would be great to see all of your faces. And that's everything from me. I will now hand over to our host and chair for today, Lydia Rusling. Lydia is currently leading the Towns Fund work for 3 towns in Lincolnshire, the historic port town of Boston and 2 coastal resort towns of Mablethorpe and Skegness. She also supports the economic growth and tourism development across the Lincolnshire Wolds and coast, which along with Boston attracts over 5 million visitors each year. Previously, Lydia worked for the destination management organisation for the City of Lincoln, establishing Visit Lincoln as an independent community interest company and growing its membership of tourism and hospitality business. As chief executive of Visit Lincoln, she supported 7 Discover England Fund projects, a new county tourism awards and several award-winning marketing campaigns. She also championed the tourism sector deal for the region, as well as and a new direct train service between London and Lincoln with LNER. With 17 years experience working across Lincolnshire's tourism industry, Lydia has also played a central role in many of the country's tourism projects. She joined Lincolnshire Tourism in 2004, managing 2 major film tourism campaigns, resulting in worldwide press coverage for the region. She moved to Lincolnshire County Council in 2007 to project manage the local food initiative Taste of Lincolnshire, and between 2012 and 2015, worked on the £22 million regeneration of Lincoln Castle. Lydia has been a board member of Local Enterprise Partnership Visitor Economy Board since its inception in 2017, and is now working on using the Towns Fund investment into Lincolnshire to improve the tourism offer and better promote the county's city, countryside and coast. So thank you very much, Lydia, and I believe you're on radio as well promoting this event. So thank you very much for that. Lydia, the floor is now yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Jack, and welcome to all the speakers and to all our guests today. I think despite being in the midst of yet another lockdown and very much in emergency response mode, and I know for those colleagues on the call today that work for local government, we're focused on delivering a package of financial support to businesses, but we all have a responsibility to focus very much on the future, listen and plan for how best to strengthen the future of tourism. For the area that I represent, Lincolnshire, it's very important that we do that. The Centre for Towns has identified our two coastal towns, Mablethorpe and Skegness, as first and second in the listing of coastal towns most at risk from the impacts of the pandemic. But I'm sure, like everyone else listening today and joining this webinar, we are really eager to hear from our industry experts on the discussion points today, which include government support, staycations, developing a talented workforce, collaboration and promoting tourism. So I'm very honoured to introduce Gloria, who is the President and CEO of World Travel and Tourism Council. Before I hand over to Gloria, I'd like to just do a quick introduction for her. Gloria joined the World Travel and Tourism Council in August 2017, following a varied career in travel and tourism. Recognised as one of the most influential women in Mexico by CNN and Expansion, Gloria began her professional career in 1989 at NCR Corporation, working in the Latin America, Middle East and Africa regions. Since 1995, she has worked for the travel industry, starting at the Sabre Travel Network and Sabre Holdings. In March 2010, President Calderon appointed her as Minister of Tourism, and 2 weeks after, she was given the full responsibility of the Mexican Tourism Board. Under her leadership, the National Agreement for Tourism in Mexico was created and signed on the 28th of February 2011. Gloria received the Good Neighbor Award from the US-Mexico Chamber of Commerce, and Virtuoso Award did Mexico the best tourism board in the world due to her successful branding and repositioning efforts. In addition, Gloria has been Special Advisor on Government Affairs to Harvard University and part of the Future for Travel, Tourism and Aviation Global Agenda Council of the World Economic Forum. So I'm very honoured to pass over to Gloria. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Good morning. Thank you, Jack. Thank you for having us and this wonderful opportunity, and really a pleasure to be part of this session with such a distinguished group of participants. It is really a pleasure to be here. WTTC, or the World Travel and Tourism Council, as it was a little bit mentioned before, represents the global private sector. This organization was created 30 years ago. A little bit over 200 CEOs from around the world are our members. We also have destinations in addition, and we also SMEs. Currently, our chair is Chris Naceta, the CEO for Hilton Worldwide. We have vice chairs by region. So for instance, in the case of Europe, Desiree Bollier from Value Retail is our vice chairs. And we represent, what's interesting, every single industry within the sector, not only airlines, airports, hotels, we have cruises, tour operators, OTAs, GDSs, car rentals. 30% of the members are in Europe, 30% in Asia, 30% in America, and 10% in the rest of the world. These are just some of the faces that I'm sure that probably some of very familiar, like for instance, Keith Bard, Intercontinental Hotel, he's based in the UK. And as I say before, we have many others. So these individuals work united and created, some of them, this council 30 years ago to speak with one voice. Because 30 years ago, there was a very important meeting between 4 CEOs and the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. And one of the things that the Secretary suggested was to create a council, because within the travel sector, we have multiple industries. And the challenge is that sometimes we don't speak with the same voice. Now, besides speaking with one voice to all the governments around the world, we also have done a lot of research. We have 30 years doing research in 185 countries around the world. And one of our main partners, that probably you know them well, is Oxford Economics. We use multiple, but Oxford Economics help us with the data. So we have 30 years of data, as I say, of 185 countries. And we not only count international and domestic travelers, we count the impact to GDP, which we believe is significant in our conversations with governments to make a point about the importance of our sector. As you will see here, according to the data that we published for 2019, travel and tourism contributed 10% of the global GDP. And as you will see in the chart in the bottom, the gray line is the economy in the world. The green line is travel and tourism. For the last 9 years, we were able to outpace the growth of the economy. And of course, 2019 was not the exception, where we grew 40% more with 3.5 versus 2.5. 330 million jobs around the world, depending on our sector, which is 1 in 10. And very important to clarify here that we have to use the same methodology in order to compare countries and in order to be consistent. So we measure the direct impact for travel and tourism, the indirect and the induced. And that's according to the satellite account. Basically, when you visit a hotel, the bill that you pay, that's direct impact. However, the coffee that you drink in the morning, that's indirect because that coffee was purchased thanks to the hotel. And then you have what is called the induced, that is related to the salaries of the employees or the infrastructure of the building and some other things. So we need to count the entire chain in order to understand the impact of what we do. Now, the most important number from this graph that I always like to highlight is when you look at all the jobs that they were created in all the sectors, in all the industries in the world in the last 5 years, every single year of all the new jobs, 1 in 4 were in our sector, which is interesting, but it's also the biggest challenge because those jobs were not created last year, and those jobs, unfortunately, are not going to be created probably this year either. So this is the sector that contributes the most in job creation among all the sectors around the world. And here, of course, you have the mix between international and domestic and business and leisure, and this is the global average. In the case of the UK, numbers are a little similar, is 9%, the contribution of GDP according to our data, and which is a very important number, and a little bit less than 4 million jobs depending on our sector. Now, if we move to the next slide, please, you will see also the impact of the unprecedented situation. Last year, as it was the worst crisis ever. We have never experienced something like that. I'm sure that you have heard that multiple times. But this is the data. We estimated at the beginning that the impact was going to be 30 million jobs, then 50. According to the last numbers that we have, it was almost 143 million jobs were impacted already in December. And this number we estimated that can grow to 174. We don't have the last figure. We will release that soon, but it's between 143 and 174 million jobs impacted globally. $3.8 trillion or $3,800 billion. And the reason is because domestic globally average was down 33% and international was 65 down. As you will see here, internationally was pretty much paralyzed in most of the world. And that's what compared to 2019, it was 65% down. Domestic, some countries we were able to see the recovery. UK, for instance, was an interesting case that there was some domestic travel and a great job from destinations in the countries. But at the same time, in other regions, we also saw recovery in case of this domestic hire. Now, we just released recently that we believe that this year we can bring back as many as 111 million jobs if we do the right thing, if we follow some things. And now, what are those things? Let me elaborate a little bit more of our research and what we have done. Now, we not only do economic impact report and look at the data and the GDP and jobs, we also like to learn from the past because we believe decisions should be based in data, in information, and knowledge from the past. We cannot ignore the past, and that should help us to move forward. So For us, crisis has been one of the priorities since I joined the organization, because we know that every single situation has impacted travel and tourism, from a weather related to an outbreak, to political instability, or a security situation. So we analyzed 90 different situations in the last 20 years. We grouped them in 4 different categories, from political instability, as you can see here, outbreaks, natural disasters like hurricanes or things like that, and then tourism and security. And what's interesting for us on the learnings was that if you manage security or tourism, for instance, attacks, you can recover pretty fast as long as the crisis is managed well. As you will see here, it was 2 months minimum to be back to the levels of occupancy in hotels, as an example, 8 weeks in the Paris attacks or the Barcelona situation, or even in London, and that we had, unfortunately, but that was managed very well, those crises, great communication and all of that. But when you look at here, the worst situation that has impacted travel and tourism is, unfortunately, political instability. Now, for the times that we're living, there are 3 lessons learned that we consider since March or April last year, and we have been using as example for the path forward to go back to the new normal. And let me show you the data and explain those 3 situations. Please look at the top left of my screen or your screen, which is the world. You will see this is the last 20 years. The white line is the economy. The green line is travel and tourism. The blue bars are jobs, the jobs depending on our sector. Now, you will see that there were 2 situations that impacted the world of travel and tourism and the world in general, the economy. One was 9/11, which is the top left. And then the other one is the financial crisis. Huge situations, huge crises that impacted, of course, our sector. The difference in these 2, which are part of the lessons learned that we're reinforcing, is 9/11. You will see that it's a U-shaped recovery because we didn't have the ideal international coordination. We didn't have the ideal standard and protocols implemented around the world in terms of safety. When you travel after 9/11, different airports adopted different security protocols because the countries unfortunately didn't work together, and that had an impact to rebuild the travelers' trust. Now, in the case of the financial crisis, we had a V-shaped recovery because it was easier and faster to recover due to this amazing international coordination and public and private coordination. We were recovering in 18 months, as you will see there globally. Now, when you see the top right, that's the G20 economies, that the UK is part of that. Whatever happens in the UK, that has a huge impact in the world and pretty much is the same effect. So if we can manage the G20, we believe, or have them to work together, then it has a direct impact to the world. Now look, please, the bottom right. Bottom right is China. It's just the GDP for China. Fascinating to see that the 9/11 had no impact because China was not that relevant in tourism, probably, or because it was more domestic, right? But you will see that they had a situation there in 2003. It was the SARS, a big outbreak that they were impacted. And despite not having a vaccine, let's look at the recovery. It was unbelievable fast because they were able to isolate infected people. And that's what we have been saying since very beginning. It is crucial to isolate infected people. Now, we know that in the case of COVID, the challenge is the asymptomatics, but that's why testing should be the priority. Testing not only people with symptoms, but testing people with no symptoms so that we can isolate infected people and be able to travel as we did after SARS, MERS, or Ebola, despite that we didn't have a vaccine. So the lessons learned took us to the path for recovery and the 4 principles that we established. And here you will see what are those 4 principles. And I'm going to highlight really quick some examples of some successes that we have seen. The first one, and the most important, and perhaps the biggest challenge that we have had last year, is the international public and private coordination. And we need to have a better coordination. Last year, it was clear that the coordination among countries wasn't there. We didn't share enough best practices. And the coordination with the private sector in many countries was not ideal. So at the right time, when the countries, for instance, are ready to reopen the borders, it needs to be done in a coordinated way. Because if that's not in a coordinated way, we have a direct impact to the destinations, that the sourcing markets or the markets, the inbound markets as well, that they are receiving the travelers. So, for instance, there needs to be agreements of testing frameworks. There needs to be replacing the quarantines, we believe, with test and release or testing measures has been more successful. And then, of course, eliminate the travel advisory bans. But in order for this to happen, the coordination is key. We have a lot of examples to share. One of the good examples is what happened with the business travelers here in the EU, in the UK. Iceland, I don't know if you're aware, but Iceland hasn't had a lockdown at all. But Iceland has had, of course, it's a very small country, but they have had a good coordination, public and private, and also good coordination with other countries. Greece is a very interesting case as well of how did they manage the COVID and the low number of cases because of this coordination and the measures that they were implemented or they were able to implement early on. So the point number one, as I say, the coordination is crucial. The number two, we need to look at the experience of the traveler. And we believe that there are two phases, one during the vaccine or before the vaccine, another after the vaccine, which is basically, we need to continue testing. We need to include to the experience test so that we avoid exporting or importing the virus. We have been saying this since April, especially if you're moving from a high COVID cases destination to a low COVID cases destination. In that case, we need to implement a rapid test that is reliable and is a low-cost test. One of the challenges with the test and release is that the test is very expensive, and if that is going to cost you 150 pounds and then do times 4, then travel is not an option, and that impacts, of course, the traveling. We need to be able to welcome people as long as we do the testing before departure. Now, because of the lack of coordination, some nations have implemented tested on arrival, and that has been also successful, but the virus is already imported. So we really prefer test on departure, and on top of that, a contact tracing app. And we need to understand also that the vaccine is not the only solution. Yes, the rollout of the vaccine is crucial, is very important. UK is leading the way with Israel and UAE, but we need to continue with testing and the different protocols. The vaccine is just one path. We need to prioritize the vulnerable groups, but also the vaccination should not be a requirement for travel because the supply is limited, because the supply should prioritize the vulnerable groups and the elderly. But that doesn't mean that we cannot travel. Meanwhile, as we have seen in some nations, that we can continue traveling. I have traveled myself following the protocols and with all the things in place that we have included. After the vaccination, we will see also that you might need some health passes or health certificates. We don't want to talk about health passports. We had health passports 30 years ago, and that yellow book that probably most of you remember, and that was used for vaccination and things like that. We believe that more than a passport, and even the WHO does not agree to having health passports, we believe a health certification should be fine to say that you got a negative results for the test, and that would allow you to board the plane in case that you're coming from a high risk nation to a low risk nation, as we say before. Now, in the case of the passes or health certificates or whatever you want to call it, or contact tracing apps, there are so many out there that now we're working in putting them together so that we can have this interoperability, because we are working with Common Pass, AOK Pass, IATA Pass, you name it, so many passes out there. But it's very important to use the technology and not impact the seamless experience. The third one is the adoption of the protocols. As a lesson learned from 9/11, we at the private sector decided to create some of those protocols and make sure that the experience was the same. If you stay in a hotel in London, New York, Madrid, or Mexico, the experience should be the same, that you cannot, for instance, get close to the food, there are no buffets, that you need to wear the mask, so that would help us to rebuild travelers' trust, the confidence that we need for people to feel comfortable and don't have the impact that we had after 9/11, that is the U-shape that I shared with you. So that's why we created the protocols, and we believe it's very important, and it's up to us to recover faster if we all follow the protocols, if we all wear the mask, if we all respect the recommendations from the healthcare and public health officials. And the last one, but not least, is to continue with the government support, which is, of course, crucial. The UK has been amazing, the support that we have seen. Germany also has provided some very interesting schemes with no interest loans for small and medium enterprises, which is great. We have seen a lot of good cases. We have gathered more than 150 countries, great experiences and data. There are unfortunately some countries that are providing no support, but this is going to be crucial. And then on top of this, the investment in promotion is going to be very important to recover our sector. Now, let me tell you really quick about the protocols. The rooms from our hotels were offered to doctors and nurses at the peak of COVID, and we were able to maintain those installations COVID-free. That knowledge went to the protocols, for instance, for hospitality, in combination with the knowledge from WHO, from CDC, and all these guidelines. So the first protocol that we released was for hospitality. And all the hotels of WTTC members and other different hotels, also small and medium, start implementing the same protocols. And what we decided to do is, because our members were asking, okay, what about the travelers that they want to identify who has these standards, very high level protocols? And that's what our members created, this Safe Travel Stamp. It's just a recognition that your protocols are at the highest level. This stamp is for free. The only point was just to recognize whoever has those standard protocols. And then we had the destinations telling us, what about if I have implemented the protocols, will you recognize me so that the travelers know that it's okay to travel to my destination, and I am the one who's supervising the implementation of the protocols? And we agree, and that's why we started giving this recognition. So far, we have more than 220 destinations or countries around the world that we have granted this Safe Travel Stamp. In some cases, it's an entire country, like Peru, for instance. In some other countries, it's like destinations, like in the case of Spain, Seville and Barcelona were faster than the rest of Spain, so we granted the stamp to them before. But the point here is that we gave them the stamp as a recognition. It is not a certification. The guidelines come from their local public health officials, but what we just say, these are the standards that the global private sector has defined, and if your standards are at the same level than ours, we will give you that, so that you can help us to rebuild the trust from the traveler. Because the main goal of this stamp is just to help us to rebuild trust from the traveler, so that we can have people making sure that they know that we have done everything in our power to reduce as much possible the risk of getting COVID in our premises, in our tours, in our hotels or hotels and breakfast, or whatever is the case. Now, let me tell you a little bit more of what we have done besides the protocols. Talking about the public and private collaboration, last year, Saudi Arabia was the chair for the G20. And we talked to them. The great news was the Saudi opened to the world, as you probably know, in 2019. So we talked to Saudi and about the importance of the collaboration, public and private. And for the first time ever, a country invited the private sector to speak. WTTC has always participated in the G20 tourism meeting. However, this is the first time that we had a unique session just for the private sector and the leaders of the governments to talk to each other. And also we were able to present a plan with 12 commitments from the private sector, 12 things for the governments, and that we were able to recover 100 million jobs if this plan is executed. We had the Minister of the UK, for instance, very successful. Nigel was speaking there and representing the country, and we thank him for his partnership with the private sector that has been amazing. But this happened last year. The other thing that happened is that under the leadership of Saudi Arabia, for the first time in the Leaders' Declaration, the collaboration of the private sector was included. They made history because, again, very important, this collaboration, public and private. And unfortunately, I have to be very clear here, some international organizations has let us down. Some international organizations, they don't see the importance of this collaboration, public and private, and including everyone. And that's key to move faster, based in the data, based in science, based in information, and based in the analysis that we have done in multiple situations in the past. So we thank the leaders of the G20 also for including the importance of travel and tourism, and also endorsing our safe and seamless travel, and of course, welcoming the collaboration with the private sector, which is key. In the next slide, please. So some learnings from 2020, just to close, as I have a couple of more slides. International collaboration, crucial, is key, and we need to continue pushing for that. The private sector led the way in many ways because we can move faster, adopting quick, for instance, the innovation, the flexible bookings in case that's part of the commitments that we made in the G20. By the way, you can download the plan. It's in on our website and see a lot of the details. The travel corridors, a great success. That's for instance, as an example, when the UK opened the travel corridor with Dubai, we saw 2 million reservations in a very short time frame. That was very impressive. And this goes both ways, the US and the UK. For instance, for the UK, the most important market is the US in terms of inbound. Americans are the #1 nationality that visit this country. It's very important to have these travel corridors also with the US. The financial support that is crucial for not only the existence and the survival, but also for the recovery. So the extension of the furlough schemes is a good example, but we need to have very specific support because our sector has been impacted the most. It's not all the sectors at the beginning, all the sectors were supported the same when some sectors had more difficult times than others. Sharing best practices, another one. We have established task force, weekly calls, a lot of ways to share in best practices. I mentioned Iceland. We had some cases from South Korea. We had cases from Japan, how have they used artificial intelligence. We have information from Greece, how they are using the technology, for instance, and how they manage the COVID situation, from Germany, of course, from the UK, from so many. That is very important to do best practice sharing. The roadmap, what do we see? We hope to remove the quarantines once we see this vaccination rolling out, especially in some markets. The quarantines are the ones that are impacting the most our sector. And we have been saying since, say April, May last year, that the quarantines is basically saying all of you are infected, assuming 100% uninfected, instead of being laser focused and isolated infected people as we were able to do in the past. So that's what we believe, that we should continue with an aggressive vaccination program as it is in the UK and in several other markets. However, we know that the production of the vaccine is limited and the supply is limited. So we need to continue with testing. Testing is the solution. Testing for Congress, testing for events, testing before arrivals, as I say, on departures. Testing should be something that we should endorse and support. And this is something that we have seen has been very successful in countries that have been able to recover. China, for instance, has recovered domestic 100%, and testing was crucial there. South Korea did a lot of testing, as you know. Greece is the same situation, and some of the cases that I mentioned. The next is the alignment. So I celebrate this type of events because the alignment is crucial. And then we believe that we'll have a global summit, a hybrid format summit that will allow us to the recovery, as we are anticipating that we're going to have a strong summer. Next, please. Let me just tell you a couple of tools that we have. In our website, there is a dashboard that we put together with McKinsey that has information that gets from Google, from the hotels, from the bookings, from all the OTAs and GDSs and different sources, to tell you by destination what people are looking. Is sun and beach, is cultural, and how are the bookings in that destination, and that's giving us an idea of where we are. And that's basically what we see. We just released actually a couple of days ago, our forecast that we're going to be able to recover up to 111 million jobs this year globally, as long as we all follow the protocols. Because it's not up to the governments, it's not up to the private sector, it's up to all of us, including the traveler. If we all wear the mask, if we all follow the protocols, if we all continue the testing, and at the same time continue with the rollout of the vaccination, we believe we're going to be able to have a new normal sooner. And we are seeing a strong recovery starting in April in some parts of the world, and having a strong summer in Europe, in Asia, and in America, of course, and globally. So I want to thank you for inviting me. We are going to be hosting our Global Summit as a platform for recovery in Cancun. It's going to be hybrid. If you want to participate remotely or in person, more than happy to give you access so that you can hear directly from our members and our leaders. And Andrew Brown from my team will be participating in the panel to answer any questions that you might have, as he's one of our experts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gloria. I think everybody would join me in saying thank you for your incredible presentation and joining us today. If anybody's got any questions, if you could put them in the chat, but whilst you're busy typing, I'd just like to kind of, again, reiterate my thanks and obviously highlighting the importance of testing, but also working together to rebuild that trust and how coordination is so critical. But in terms of coordination, who do you really see as being kind of leading the way with that? So I absolutely agree with you around coordination, but I still feel that comes from strong leadership. So would you say that comes more from the private sector or from the public sector or jointly?
The coordination has to be jointly. Last year, it happened mainly between the private sector and the academia and some governments, right? But like, for instance, the coordination that we're talking also is among governments. And that coordination, unfortunately, was the biggest challenge last year. And I have multiple examples. One of the examples is the testing. For instance, some countries were very successful in the testing at the beginning of COVID. Some countries were not. Why was that? Because every country wanted to create their own test. They wanted to use their own solutions. They didn't learn from each other. And that was very painful because some countries saw a spike in the COVID cases instead of learning from each other. I can tell you, for instance, in Asia, like South Korea had an amazing test. However, the neighbors didn't want to use the South Korean test. They wanted to create their own test. As an example, South Korea was able to control the spread really quick and others took longer, right? And the same situation happened here in Europe. So that coordination needs to happen more. They learned that lesson, but they haven't learned other lessons with getting together and having this international testing protocol. But to answer to your question, I think it has to be both. But and we use the G20 as the platform. Now we're working very closely with OECD. I have to say the UK government works very well with us, and I believe the private sector in general. But we would like to see more the UK working with other governments as well. That unfortunately we haven't seen that in the case of tourism, right? At the same level. I think that it has been a challenge there in some cases, or aviation, for instance.
Thank you. We've got a question from Professor Dimitrios. Would you like to ask the question yourself, or do you want me to read it for you?
I can do. Gloria, you mentioned that the public is responsible, and you're absolutely right. But what we see is that something like 20% of the public does not follow the rules, does exactly the opposite thing. And I think they keep us in prison effectively. Is there any way that we can kind of influence the public?
Yes, I think we tried to launch a campaign last year, the Word to Care. I think we need to educate more the public, because unfortunately that 20% due to this type of virus, right? Other viruses, it was easier to isolate the people infected. But here we have heard that between 60 and 80% are asymptomatic, right? And that is the biggest challenge. They think that they are healthy, therefore they go see family and friends. And that's when they spread the virus, and they think that they don't have to wear the mask. I can share with you, I was with my family, for instance, in the Bournemouth market a couple of months ago, and I felt so much peer pressure because we were the only ones wearing the mask, honestly. My son, who's 14, he told me, "Mother, why no one is wearing the mask if we're in the middle of the pandemic?" And I said, "That's a good question." Yeah, and you can see all the demographics, different groups, not only the younger generation, elderly also not wearing the mask. And I was very concerned. I said, we're going to have a second wave for sure. And there you have it. The community to community transmission here has been unbelievable. And that's what we need to follow the advice from the healthcare and the public health experts. And it's up to all of us. There is a research that Harvard School of Public Health, that we work with them as well, did. They say, if we all wear the mask, these should have been gone in 8 weeks, right? If we 100% wear the mask, because reduces 96% the possibility of spreading. Can you believe it's only 4% what is left? But unfortunately, as you say, that 20% is becoming the 100% later. And that's why we all are impacted and in lockdowns again.
Thank you, Gloria. We've also got a question from Claire Inkson from the University of Westminster. Would you like to ask the question, Claire? What she said is, you mentioned the importance of testing on departure. Do you have any idea of how that would be implemented in practice? For example, would the transport operator be responsible?
The challenge that we have is that we need an international testing protocol, right? A protocol that people agree and that the countries agree. The ideal situation in my mind is that I can do a rapid test before departure. And if my test is positive, I should be not allowed to board the plane. And if my test is negative, then I should allow to board the plane. That will give me confidence that everyone in the plane had tested negative. Now, in addition, I should still continue wearing the mask, and I should continue with the sanitizer and all the measures that we know. And for instance, I was able to travel. Heathrow has great protocols. The airlines have great protocols. So the combination of all these solutions is not just one solution for everything. It's not only the vaccination, it's the combination of things. If you do the test before departure, that test needs to be valid on arrival so that they don't put me in quarantine 14 days. And perhaps, depending on the country, I might need to do another test 5 days later to validate that I don't have COVID, or I might be okay with that test. But the problem is that sometimes you need to do a test on departure, a test on arrival, and then it's still being quarantined. So what is the point? And if we're not using the science and the solutions that we have, if you analyze the model of Iceland, it's fascinating. It's very interesting what they have done in terms of testing. Yes, they had the 14 days quarantines. They never had lockdowns. But then they were asking countries to do testing before departure, but they were not able to get this international protocol that I'm calling. But they say, okay, let's do the testing on arrival. And then they were monitoring the people. And as you will see, there's no transmissions from travelers. The few transmissions that you have seen are in the community to community. So in my mind, testing on departure avoids exporting the virus and also helps you to isolate the infected people, which is what we did in the past with only symptoms.
Thank you ever so much for your presentation and for answering the questions today. I'm pleased now to hand over to our next speakers, Professor Dimitrios and Professor Adam. Professor Dimitrios, thank you. They're both fellows at the International Centre for Tourism and Hospitality Research at Bournemouth University. Professor Dimitrios is a strategic management and marketing expert with specialisation in information communication technology applications in the tourism, travel, hospitality and leisure industries. He's the director of the e-Tourism Lab and deputy director of the International Centre for Tourism and Hospitality Research at Bournemouth University Business School. His research pioneers smart and ambient intelligence tourism with a particular focus on innovation, entrepreneurship and destination ecosystems management. His colleague today, Professor Adam Blake, is a professor of economics in Bournemouth University Business School and is head of the International Centre for Tourism and Hospitality Research. He is a specialist in computable general equilibrium, CGE modelling, and has used this modelling technique to examine the economic interrelationships between tourism and other sectors of the economies of the UK, USA, Scotland and the Canary Islands, Malta, Cyprus, Mauritius and Brazil. His research has provided both theoretical advances and research based on evidence for government organisations. I'm very pleased to hand over to the two of them now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. It's great to be with you. I'll start the presentation. Adam is going to go first, and then I'll cover the last bit. Adam.
Thank you, Lydia. So, Dimitrios, if we go on to the next slide. The context of what we're looking at in terms of recovery, I'll skip over really because you all know the context that we're looking at, but in particular we're looking here at the future recovery and what recovery might look like, even if we don't know when it will happen. So yes, go on to the next slide now. So I've been involved over the past year since the pandemic started, really a couple of months after the pandemic, after we went into lockdown in the UK, with an international team looking at how we forecast tourism recovery from the pandemic. And of course, it's a very difficult thing to do because the forecasting models we have been developed over decades and decades. Forecast tourism demand are usually relatively good at being able to forecast demand in a normal year, but when we have something we've never seen before, like this pandemic, then they become rather useless, because a forecasting model would have told you that we'd expect growth to happen in 2020 and 2021, and clearly we can't use that type of model. And so we'll set this task of trying to find a way of forecasting how tourism is going to recover in particular the 20 countries, and I've put them there, but it's not entirely important why or which countries they are. But these were set for us largely because the data is available on these countries by different markets over a long period of time. Okay, go on. And we found really three main determinable factors. And what we mean by determinable factors are things that we can get data on, say something about in advance of when the recovery happens. Firstly, virus recovery. Well, we don't have data on that. There are outside forecasts of how quickly countries are going to recover from the virus, how quickly case numbers decline, and that depends on lots of different things, of course, including vaccination. But that's something in this type of forecasting we had to rely on a scenario-based approach with best case, worst case type of scenarios. Self-protecting measures are measures, and apologies, that's in white text. It doesn't come up very clearly on my screen. I'm sure it doesn't on other people's. So that the self-protecting measures is about how will governments continue to protect their populations through things like closing the borders, flight bans and quarantines. And so for this, we looked at what happened in the first wave of the lockdown and tried to think, well, the countries that were quick to shut down their borders are probably going to be the ones that are going to keep those restrictions up there for longer. And actually, one of the things in these 20 countries we have that's quite interesting or surprising is that some of the most intensive tourism destinations that we have there, such as Thailand and Mauritius, come up as two particular cases, which are very, very reliant on tourism. Of course, there are two of the very quick countries to lock down their borders, and Thailand closed their borders for everything but diplomatic travel for the rest of 2020. And they were, I think, continuing that into 2021, although I'm not too sure of the exact situation there now. So those self-protecting measures, countries, and those are, of course, the things that you've heard about from Gloria there, about how we protect the virus coming into the country from the virus coming into the country, and how quickly we are going to enable travel and things that the travel industry can do. So I'm not going to repeat what Gloria said there, very useful points about different ways of enabling travel. And at the bottom there, accessibility. One of the key things that we're going to see in the recovery is going to be that some destinations are accessible to tourists. Their typical tourist year involves tourists coming from nearby countries, often overland or by short haul flights, and other countries rely very heavily on long haul flights. And quite clearly, there's going to be a difference between the two in the recovery. So, for example, Australia and New Zealand and Mauritius did particularly poorly in terms of accessibility. They're very reliant on long haul flights, whereas most of the European destinations we would expect to do well in terms of accessibility. And the UK is the worst in that sense here in terms of accessibility. Out of European countries, we rely much more on long haul flights coming into the country for our tourism, and therefore we'd expect that we wouldn't recover too quickly because of that. Next slide. And we combine these three indexes into an overall index. And I can't show you the exact results for this today because they're not published yet. But we look at these 20 different countries and in fact 100 different flows of tourists from market to a destination. So we look at, for example, US tourists coming to the UK and combine them into a recovery index. Yeah, next slide, I think. So some of the lessons from what we've done there that can be generalized. Firstly, for the UK, the virus recovery, it's a mixed pattern for the UK, isn't it? That we can see that we're leading in terms of vaccinations, but we've also been very heavily hit by the second wave of the pandemic, much more than other countries. And we're lagging behind in terms of our recovery from the virus itself, countries in East Asia and Australia and New Zealand. And Australia and New Zealand is a particular example where they have some very large negatives which are looking like they're going to restrict their tourism industries there, but also some positives. So they're quite difficult to forecast what's going to happen there. Self-protecting measures. The UK has been one of the slowest countries in our sample there to introduce measures to restrict travel, and so we would expect them to be one of the quickest to remove them. And accessibility, well, the UK actually does quite badly in accessibility in terms of these 20 countries that we looked at. After Australia, New Zealand and Mauritius, it's then the worst in terms of relying on long-haul travel. So we need to see the industry being there to recover. And then we have market and substitution effects. And this is one thing that came out of this work, was looking at substitution effects. You're all very familiar with the staycation effect, people substituting foreign travel for domestic travel. We would expect the same things to be happening from different markets. So we need to look at nearby markets that can access the UK without long-haul flights, for example, and markets where there are also vaccination programs and where virus levels are low are going to be the ones that recover first. And we need continued government support. I'm sure many of you will know that the VAT reduction, for example, has been very useful, but also VAT reduction is useful if your business is open and you have customers. So we really need a guarantee from the government that VAT reduction is going to continue so that businesses know that they can afford to borrow now to keep their business in operation, and they'll have a future when there is recovery. And following the foot and mouth epidemic in 2001, we saw a greater recognition of tourism that came about and led to things like the Tourism Alliance being founded. And I think we'll see that coming out of this pandemic as well, globally, a much greater recognition of the importance of tourism to our economies. And I'll hand over to Dimitrios at this point. Dimitrios.
Thank you very much, Adam. I think we all know the bad stories about COVID, but I think there's some positive stories as well. And I see that many of the people who participate in this tourism officers in various places in the UK. I think the UK had a fantastic opportunity because of staycation. A lot of places had fantastic summer. Apart from the lockdown periods, they had a fantastic summer. In Bournemouth, we had an excellent summer. In fact, the average room rates were very high. The restaurants were super busy. The New Forest was a similar kind of situation. So for the first time, we kind of almost forced the domestic market to come to domestic resorts. And I think what that is going to leave a very positive kind of outcome for the UK in terms of domestic tourism. I think I'm very proud of what happened in the tourism industry this summer because of the humanity and the solidarity that many of our people in our industry has showed. And there's quite a lot of leadership that is bringing resilience back to the industry. The industry learn how to be resilient. Of course, we had a very high heat because of the situation, but I think we are very good at dealing with crisis, and this is the crisis unlike any other. But we saw a lot of activity that took us away from the me to we, and for example, in Bournemouth, we've got the wonky table initiative, where Andy Lennox, one of the restaurant guys, has brought together a network of about 250 restaurants in Bournemouth, and they talk about the problems. They're trying to support each other, and they try to support society. And Andy has showed fantastic leadership, and we've seen a lot of solidarity. And it's not what tourism. It's what tourism and hospitality can do for community rather than what community can do for tourism and hospitality. And that's really significant because in the beginning, a lot of people came up and said, save tourism. And I said, no, it's actually how tourism and hospitality can help us save people, save the NHS, save society. And we've seen a lot of these initiatives where people did a lot of those things. So I think when we're going forward, we will not return to the past, but we are departing to a new future. And the new future is really about our ability to look into where the situation is going to be rather than look in the past and try to return to 2019. And I think this is really important trick, is really to look into 2021, 22, and 23. We expect that after 23, the industry is going to operate in a new kind of way. We need a reignite of the industry so we can start the engines going. We need to refocus and redesign of a lot of the things that we're doing, and we need a re-engineering in terms of focusing on co-creation of experiences, looking to ways that the tourism industry and the tourism experience will be much more meaningful in the future. I think one of the things that we learn is from COVID is the end of planning and the beginning of agility. A lot of industry processes are very much planning oriented, and they are based on the same circle that goes every year. And I think once this planning process is being stopped, and we saw that over Christmas, but I always do Christmas with my family. I always do that. I always plan how to do these things. Once you kind of stop the planning, you start to bring agility in and to change a lot of things. I think when you see what's happening is that we need, obviously, and Gloria and Adam talked about how we can change protocols and processes and bring ecosystems to develop agility. And one of the things that I'm working on is real-time context-based information, real-time context-based decision-making, where we're looking to locations, clientele, space, architecture, services, personnel, business processes, in order to identify what are the key elements in order to operate. And a lot of the things that we saw over the summer in terms of bubbles and corridors were based on those things. I don't have a lot of time to explain all of those things, but I think the three things that will enable us to restart tourism in a way that's going to take us back to or forward to the new heights is herd immunity, smart and agile tourism, and resilience. And herd immunity is all about vaccines. And this is the number from yesterday, 4.6 million people have been vaccinated. But I really want you to focus on this graph for a minute. So Israel, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain are the top three places that they've vaccinated people. Israel has done about 32% of the population had the first dose of the vaccine. The UK is on number 4 with almost 7%. Now, we need people to be vaccinated not only at the place of origin where they start their journey, but also at the destination. This will determine the corridors of the future. So keep an eye on which countries and which regions are vaccinated, because that will determine where we start from and where we're going, because you need the whole ecosystem to be vaccinated. And you can see the different countries and who has started and who hasn't. And you can see here who has started and who has not started yet. So you can see which regions are going to progress. But those countries that they have not started yet, that means that there'll be sources of COVID that they'll be spreading. So the more we vaccine everybody in the world, the better we can get the escape card. And as far as technology is concerned and smartness, this is my research on ambient intelligence and how technology is coming forward to support tourism in general. And what we'll see is that we need digitization throughout the process. We need contactless information and sharing information throughout the process. This from Amadeus, this is some of the protocols that they're developing in terms of supporting the customer throughout the journey without necessarily, with reducing touch and also by sharing information and tracing information. And this is something that we had in Bournemouth this summer, the congestion application, where it was saying to people where to go and where not to go. If it was green, it was low congestion area. If it was red, it was very high congestion area. And you have seen some of the things on the television this summer where a lot of people, as soon as they could get out, they went straight to the beach. And this is how we need to manage this kind of situation. We'll have applications and passports that they're coming forward to support some of these things. And this is something that we are developing with one of my PhD students, Alicia Bethune, in terms of the real-time resilience. I know it's quite complicated, but really what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring all the data, big data together to analyze the situation in every particular place. And then based on this information, create real-time plans using agility in order to make decisions. So this is something that we're developing currently. We'll develop it very soon and we'll share it. I'd like to stop here and take questions. This is how you can contact me or Adam, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Adam and Dimitrios. That was fascinating. Thank you both for your time this morning and welcome any comments or questions. I was particularly heartened to see the focus on reigniting tourism and on supporting kind of that local community approach. I've got a question in terms of the digital elements that you were focusing on, Dimitrios, and whether businesses really need any additional support to adopt those digital changes. We've seen particularly in our area some difficulties in getting businesses to adopt that digital technology.
Yeah, I mean, digital adoption is always a challenge, and it's always a pyramid. So you've got 10–15% of the people who are leading the technological adoption, and they've already got systems and they're very good at doing these things. And then you see on the bottom of the pyramid a lot of people who have always done business as usual, and they haven't really adopted technological innovations. I think a lot of people who are not competent in terms of how they're using the new tools, they'll struggle. And I think this is where councils, this is where the government needs to provide incentives, and this is where organizations like banks, when they give loans, they need to make sure that when they're giving money to someone, they've got the tools to actually manage this money successfully, because otherwise it's money down the drain. So I think what we really need to look at is how we can support those organizations. And particularly we're talking about small businesses, kind of family small businesses. But what we always find, because this is not a UK thing, you know, it's everywhere in the world. What you find is that the new generation, so the kids of the family are coming forward and they're much more technologically savvy. And they can bring a whole range of innovations, and they do it anyway in their personal life. I think it's a matter of people understanding that digital competence and agility is not an option anymore. And if you're not there, you know, once upon a time, if you were not on yellow pages, nobody will find you. Now it's kind of, if you are not on the digital sphere, people do not find you. And I think it's kind of working with local suppliers, universities, knowledge providers to actually support these people to come forward. But let's be honest with ourselves, not everybody will survive. And actually, this is not a bad thing, because we really need to survive. We really need to survive those who are competent and they can go forward. And we need to see what we can do with those who cannot survive. And what you have seen is that those people who have been going through this storm in a successful way are those people who are really agile. And that's why I keep talking about agility and smartness in kind of engaging with their markets, talk to their markets on social media, talk with their communities, support everybody, and demonstrate humanity.
Thank you. Looking at the time, we will move on now to Deirdre Wells. Deirdre was appointed as CEO of Visit Kent in September 2018. She's also CEO of Go To Places, an organisation created by the company to deliver services to partners outside and in partnership with Kent, including the Big Weekend and a number of national tourism projects under the government's Discover England Fund. Prior to her appointment to Visit Kent, Deirdre was Chief Executive of UK Inbound, representing nearly 400 UK inbound tourism businesses. Deirdre joined UK Inbound following 20 years in government at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, working on a variety of high-profile projects, including the Millennium Dome, Liverpool Capital of Culture 2008, and the 2012 London Olympic and Paralympic Games, and latterly as Head of Tourism. Deirdre is chair of the English Tourism Week and sits on the board of the Tourism Society and the Tourism Alliance. And I'm very pleased to hand over to Deirdre now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. So I'm going to share my screen, it's hopefully you can see that now. So if I can have a thumbs up from somebody, that would be good. Brilliant. Yes, I'm here wearing two hats. The first one is mainly our Go To Places hat. And we like to think of ourselves as the people who bring stakeholders together. So lots of discussions already this morning about the importance of public and private sector partnership and collaboration. And we all know that tourism is a shared endeavour, and, you know, supporting our places to really thrive is very much around bringing those stakeholders together. And I'm just looking at that picture, and I'm sure we're all thinking, goodness me, that was taken a while ago. But I think we're all hoping that at some point we'll be able to see that sort of vibrancy back again. And a lot about what we're doing at the moment is looking at how we can do that as quickly as possible and in a way that really builds confidence. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about us and where we've come from and what we're seeing across our destinations in terms of both the challenges that COVID has presented, but I'm hoping also to give you a few reasons to be cheerful in terms of what we're seeing in terms of future activity, and also really how to capitalize on those. So as was said, you know, we're born out of Visit Kent, which was set up in 2002 as a not-for-profit organisation. We now represent over 150 businesses, and not only do we work with individual partners, but we've also set up a number of collaborative groups, whether it's on issues like golf or cruise, or most recently our Vineyard group, which is a fantastically exciting new development for the region, which we share a chalk seam with the Champagne region. So if you haven't tried Kent sparkling wine, now's your moment, particularly as we're also supporting local at the moment. We've also got involved in a number of Discover England Fund projects, but also have been working on a number of EU projects for many years and are actually still doing so. So we were lucky to get the sort of last knockings of EU support through our Experience project, which is very much focused on developing experiential tourism. We also run Visit Herts, which we started in 2015. And again, that was mainly around filling a vacuum that in terms of DMO support, and now pull together over 800 stakeholders working with 50 plus public and private sector investors. and are delighted that through our work, we feel that we're sort of delivering added value, whether it's through securing additional funding or bringing more footfall to the county. So the ROI of that collaboration, I think, is really quite strong. We also deliver a lot of support to other destinations, and this is again through our not-for-profit arm. It's about, I suppose, sharing our knowledge. It's about providing that peer support and consultancy, and whether that's sort of bespoke projects such as our Big Weekend, which is a VFR, a sort of friends and relations project, which is really around supporting locals to engage with local attractions. So we've done that in Kent for many, many years, and we now run it in a whole variety of destinations, and are very much looking at it for this year as being that moment where we can really reboot the industry. So whether it's providing advice on destination management planning, doing these sort of bespoke events, or also pulling together a number of stakeholders to participate in discovering and fund projects, we are very much in the space of collaboration, because certainly not only is it the sensible thing to do, it's actually the direction of travel for a lot of regional and national funding is around ensuring that you are working across a multiplicity of partnerships. So I just wanted to talk to a little bit about what we are seeing in terms of COVID-19, and I wanted to share with you our sort of latest data. So this is our October data. So there was that little window that we had before things started to shut again. And it was interesting to see that wherever possible, the vast majority of our attractions tried to open when they could. So even though it was way into October, 74% of our attractions were still open. Footfall was down about 42% on the previous year, but actually it wasn't bad. Lots of businesses were really trying their best to sort of max out their capacity, particularly as it was reduced due to social distancing. Interestingly, and not surprisingly, those that were open, the vast majority said that revenue was down by an average of 44%. But what was interesting was that 22% said revenue had gone up. And I think a lot of that points to those that by the time it got to October, they had really identified opportunities to upsell, to increase their retail, and to really maybe attract new audiences. In terms of furlough, and I know Kurt from Tourism Alliance will talk about this a bit later, and lots has been mentioned, particularly by Gloria this morning, about the level of support that the government has put in place. And I think it has been a lifeline. But what's interesting is how many of our attractions hadn't put people on furlough, that were still finding opportunities for them to work throughout the year. But clearly it has still been a lifeline. However, there are other areas, of course, that it's not the only game in town in terms of overheads for businesses, and that's what's been the real struggle. Accommodation is a particularly interesting one, and I'll come on to a set of data that we've had from the Southeast, which is, you may not be able to say that terribly clearly, but if you can just imagine that the top two rectangles should be a full circle if you're looking at 100% occupancy. So what's really interesting is that the bigger the hotel, the less the occupancy. Not that surprising, but interestingly, the smaller hotels doing better. City centre hotels not doing well at all. But as many people have talked about, the way that the industry has stepped up to be able to offer accommodation to key workers has been, a really valuable piece of community support, but also I think has been able to demonstrate the protocols and practice the protocols for COVID security, which has enabled them to be able to demonstrate when we have had less restrictions that they can operate in a COVID secure way. One of the interesting trends I think that we will see going forward is that shift from business to leisure tourism. So a lot of hotels obviously very dependent on business tourism, which of course has been incredibly damaged over the last year. And as we move into a new way of working, It'll be, I would imagine, hybrid events and sales calls on Zoom will persist for some time. So I think an opportunity to be able to support businesses to pivot much more towards that leisure business. And I think, looking at those occupancy rates, you can just see that decline over the last couple of years, between almost half in terms of occupancy, and of course the really important RevPAR also being down. So I think an opportunity once we come out of this to look at how can we support businesses to increase that RevPAR, particularly through engagement with the leisure business. We've also done a lot of research into what businesses really want. And as I said, we are, appreciative of what the government have done so far. And as I say, I think it's kept a number of businesses on effective life support. But when we've asked them what is the thing that the people really need now, it's that sector-specific cash grant. So 65% of those we asked said that's what they really need. So business loans are all very well, but a lot of businesses are very worried about taking on further debt. Business rate relief for a further year, I think, is really something that's top of people's list as they face another quarter going into this year where footfall is going to be very restricted. And I think having campaigned for many, many years, and I've been on both sides of the discussion, both the receiving lobbying and also lobbying for the reduced VAT rate. I think now that we've got it, I really hope that the Chancellor makes the right decision in March and keeps that going. So there's been lots of, I'm moving on to the cheerful bit. I'm sure you'll be delighted to hear. But one of the questions that comes up time and again is this going to be the year of the staycation? We definitely saw a bit of it last year. Will this be, as the restrictions start to ease, a bit of a boom year? So here's some data from Visit Britain. This is the latest consumer sentiment tracker, which says that 47% of UK adults are thinking, I'm not really sure I'm going to be going anywhere by the end of March. I don't think they're going to be wrong on that front. But actually, when it looks further into the year, quite confident about taking a UK trip between July and September. In terms of what's putting people off, obviously uncertainty. What's going to be able to happen? Where can I go? Yes, some fear about catching the virus, but also some concerns about their own financial stability and background. So what will happen with my job? What will happen with my future finances? But I think there is potentially an opportunity between as restrictions start to ease, but before people are either able to or feeling confident about international travel, a real opportunity for the staycation market. The other issue, I suppose, which is quite interesting, is that sort of growing level of vaccine confidence. So you will have probably seen on the news that TUI said that their inquiries from the over 50s were up 50%. National Express said the inquiries on the over 65s are up 187% in the last few weeks. So lots of people getting very excited about what they're going to be able to do. And I think with time and potentially money on their hands, I think there's a wider societal question about whether that's going to cause an even greater generational divide between, Team Wrinkly who can spend and are vaccinated and Team Youth who are already feeling a bit got at. Well, maybe that's just in my house when I think about the moans I'm getting from my teenage son about what will and won't be able to do this year. So if we are going to see a staycation event, everybody on this call is going to be clamoring to have the visitors. So how do you compete? How do you get that edge? So I'm going to share with you a few top tips for increasing staycations. Well, I think the first thing is around looking at travel trends. And a lot of these were bubbling up before COVID, but I think have actually been exacerbated by the pandemic. So that increased engagement with the countryside, whether it's through your daily walk, whether it's through you just connecting with your locality. There has been so much about the engagement with nature that I think has been very positive through the pandemic and likely to stay. I think that locality in terms of food and drink, particularly for destinations where that is a bit of a USP, and we're not alone in that, but it's certainly in Kent, that is something that's we're pushing very strongly. But I think those local and authentic experiences will be something I'll come back to in a minute, but it's something that I think, you know, people are no longer wanting to kind of passively consume tourism, but actually want to engage. And I think particularly when they felt they've had a year where they haven't been able to make memories and share experiences with friends and family, that will definitely be something that people will want to do when they can. They want travel to be transformative. They want to increase their well-being. Lots of discussion about the impact that the pandemic has had on people's mental health. And so when people can finally travel, that will be what they're looking for. I think also, whether it's because of concerns around climate change and wanting to lighten the footfall and the footprint in terms of travel, but I think there's also that sense of not quite ready to go back to a crowded hotspot. So I think that will be something that we will see for some time. But we're seeing a lot around experiences. And I think even if you look at some of the data that's being shared on Airbnb, experiences are what people are looking for first. In fact, what you will see is that people are choosing the experience first and then the destination. And that is a growing trend. That, you know, it's where can I go whale watching? Where can I go foraging? And then you choose a destination on that basis. And for those of us who are used to, you know, destination first, here's a list of all the things you can do once you get here. That may be something that we'll need to change. So we need to be leading with what you can do and then almost sort of bringing the destination up behind. So in addition to experiences, the other big thing is around flexibility. You know, we're seeing consumer confidence go through the floor. And people are very nervous. And I think particularly because we've had this repeat stop-start in the industry where people have been able to book travel and they haven't. And you can only do that so many times without people getting incredibly nervous. So the smart operators are offering incredible flexibility. It is very difficult for small businesses and micro businesses, but the more they can do it, the more likely they are to get that repeat booking once people are able to reopen. Interestingly, I think if we hadn't had the pandemic last year, I think it would have been all about climate change. It would have been all about sustainable tourism. And again, I don't think that issue has gone away. So being able to present your green credentials as a way of giving you a bit of a USP about supporting your brand rebuilding, being able to support businesses about how is this a way to save money as well as save the planet, but also I think to be able to expand into new markets, those people who potentially are, you know, wanting to travel, but wanting to travel in a sustainable way. So what can we do to reposition our destinations as something that provides great experiences, but also in a really sustainable way? The other issue, I think, is around that year-round offer. And many of our businesses have traditionally been incredibly seasonal, have closed for the winter, have not been able to provide that year-round offer. And that makes it quite difficult to sell in a very start-stop sort of environment. But I think the more that we can support businesses to kind of winter-proof, autumn-proof their offer, to be able to develop a year-round offer, to be able to highlight the beauty of the seasons in the country and weatherproof where possible, and close-proof where possible. I think there is a real opportunity to be able to flatten out the curve that we always see in terms of that peak and trough in terms of our annual business. So as people will start to gain confidence in traveling internationally, that they will still feel, well, actually, the UK is a place that I can have my, you know, my staycation vacation at different times of the year, and, you know, will always be a part of my holiday planning. So I just wanted to sort of finally cover a few things. It's all very well us telling you what you probably already know and what you should do. But one of the things that we base a lot of our expertise in is the fact that we are doing the day job and we're running 2 destinations. So in common with lots of colleagues on the call, we have spent most of last year providing information. It's been really interesting that despite the fantastic data that exists on many government and local government websites, actually tourism businesses will come to their DMO first because whether it's for peer support, whether it's for that very sector specific information, they just find it so much easier to be handheld through it by people who they know and love. So we've had to do an awful lot of that. We've also done an awful lot of lobbying on behalf of our destinations and behalf of our businesses. But I think the thing that we've probably spent most time on is around developing consumer confidence campaigns. It is not easy to market a destination in a pandemic at a time when you're trying to balance that message between come and travel, but come and travel in a safe way and don't upset the locals. And, actually, can you spend a bit more? Can you not travel at all? All of those messages that we've been trying to manage. Oh, no, you can come, please come. It's all really, really difficult. So we have developed 2 campaigns, which we've shared with a number of partners across the country. One was our Respect, Protect, Enjoy campaign, which was it's a strapline born out of the Countryside Code. It really plays on that natural environment, encouraging people to get out and about, but actually to do it in a way that respects the environment, respects locals, protects themselves, but also ultimately enjoys the countryside. The other one we did was, which has an allusion to respect, protect, enjoy in it, is our Secret Garden of England. This was that moment, that brief shining moment we had people last summer where people could actually come and do stuff. And I will just share that with you now.
Majestic cliffs serenely stand, crystal seas and painted skies. As footsteps trace on golden sand, a welcome sight for tired eyes. Hiking, biking, country lanes, wide spaces open to explore, sweeping marshes, wild terrains. Respect, protect, enjoy them more. Cathedrals, castles, queens and kings, legends born which time unveils. Peaceful pastime nature brings, the chalk draws along its winding trails. Beneath the beams of ancient oak, to eat, to drink, to share a tale, memories forged, senses awoke, from hops and vines and Kentish ale. Twilight heralds fresh sunrises, waiting for the one that knows. Hidden gems yield rich surprises, where England's secret garden grows.
So I just wanted to, just highlight that, because I think one of the issues that we had was, how do you do something that looks socially distanced but doesn't look like you've had a zombie apocalypse, that is engaging, that touches all those things around experiences, about food and drink, all those messages that we wanted to get out. But actually, although it was filmed in the summer, has a slightly, that could be a really nice day in April, it could be a really nice day in October, has that sort of seasonality, elasticity. Yes, just wanted to share that with you. So in terms of just to sum up where we're going, what's happening next, I think, one of the issues that we've got, I think, is that opportunity at some point this year, we will have that reboot moment. I think, something maybe perhaps we couldn't say last year because of the uncertainty around the vaccine. So whether it's April, whether it's June, whether it's September, at some point this year, there will be an ability for us to say, come now, come and travel. And I think we will still be very much looking at those major digital campaigns that are agile, that are flexible, that also look at those off-season visits that are all about consumer confidence and dispersing visitors to as far and wide in the destination as we possibly can. And I think also those local campaigns to reboot the visitor economy will be so important, connecting people with their locality, and to making sure that that as soon as possible, they can really do all the things that they want to enjoy, and that we as an industry bring joy to our communities in terms of our high streets, in our rural communities, but also our business. So that's all from me. I hope that's been helpful, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. I found that really fascinating, as I'm sure the rest of the audience did, and really helpful in terms of some ideas for the future. Whilst everybody's thinking about some questions, I'm sure that will inspire plenty of questions based on England. And obviously, I think you'll have all 64 participants hopefully heading to Kent to get back to visiting, particularly to sample the local wine, I hope. I was really encouraged as well to hear that DMO first, you know, in terms of the industry. And I think as local government people on the call, we need to be really supportive of our local DMOs going forward. Quick question in terms of hopefully when we can start to welcome back visitors, and how prepared the industry is going to be, and how, if you've got any kind of practical tips and how we can help businesses be prepared for visitors returning to our destinations across the UK.
I think two issues on that. And again, I suppose we have a little bit of experience having done a lot of start-stop last year. First is, you know, encourage them wherever possible to do the Visit England Good to Go trademark, which is effectively an indication that they have been through, bless them, 140 pages of protocols in terms of being COVID secure. But what it does is it gives that element, that stamp of approval. And Gloria talked about the one that the WTTC have, but so the England Visit England one, which is the Good to Go mark, I think a really good way of doing it. And there's lots of marketing support that DMOs and Visit England can do on the back of that. I think the other one is use your website wherever possible, because a lot of, particularly for attractions, they have to do advanced bookings, mainly in a situation where perhaps in previous years people could just turn up, and now that is no longer possible. But what that does do is, if you drive people to the website, it means that you can have that sort of mask-free, face-to-face conversation with your consumer to tell them what's going to be different, what you have done as an organization to put things in place to make them feel secure, and what your expectations of them are, and what's open, what's not. And in terms of expectation management, it's really important. So use your website, and at the moment when everything is shut, use your website to inspire people for future visits. Lots of people doing fantastic behind the scenes tours, doing those, you know, hidden, you know, this is how we're cleaning this, that, and the other. But you know, while we're shut, you know, lots of, you know, hidden cameras in terms of, you know, zoos and all the rest of it. So if you can do that, do it, and share it with your consumers. But also, I think that messaging about how are we going to keep you safe is critical.
Definitely. We've got a question from Visit Chichester. Would you like to ask that?
Hello there, Deirdre. I'm Danielle, the new CEO of Visit Chichester. I'm glad my microphone was off when you talked about the zombie apocalypse. We did have a couple of videos, I'm afraid, looked just like that. I was going to ask the question what we should be doing now in preparation for the gates opening, but I think you've just answered that. I think another question that I have, well, two other questions I have is, one, how do we streamline booking organizations? We seem to have so many and increasing numbers through this whole COVID period, so many different systems that a lot of our local businesses aren't sure which ones to use and which ones to sign up to. How do we sort of collaborate and streamline that? And I think the other question is about, in where we are in Chichester, we have very fragmented accommodation, and we are looking to develop our B&B industry alongside Airbnb. How do we do that to good effect? What would you recommend?
Okay, well, firstly, congratulations, because of course you were the benefit of a go-to places destination management plan. So follow that to the letter would be my
goodness, I should have mentioned that. We wrote our strategy plan based on that. Absolutely, I'm sorry.
Good to know. I think on booking engines, yes, I mean, there's more booking engines out there than you can shake the proverbial stick at. I think one thing that is really important is, so I think a lot of people will be aware of the Visit England TXGB platform, which was a byproduct of the Discover England Fund, where lots of projects were looking about how can we develop a booking engine that is accessible for as many organizations as possible. And so that's great because it gives a route to market for businesses that perhaps are not comfortable enough to be able to go and play with one of the big boys. But so either you can use that, or if you are going through one of the other platforms, is making sure that it's TXGB compliant, because I think it just gives you a wider route to market. So I think that if you go onto the Visit England website and follow the links to TXGB, I think it'll give some guidance about the sort of kind of, I suppose, the market leaders in terms of booking engines and flexibility, and ones that are compliant with them. In terms of accommodation, I think that's a really, really important issue. I think for many, many destinations, ourselves included, where you don't have those lots and lots of big hotels, Airbnb have brought visitors in numbers that I think, you know, has been fantastic for business, but I think periodically does have wider implications both for other accommodation providers, but also that sort of management of destination, you know, crowding. I think with there are lots and lots of great organisations that support B&B. So I can send that to you. There's Southwest Tourism. I'm sure Kurt's going to put it in the chat any minute now, because the name of the proper name has escaped me. But there are a number of associations that can really support that. I think the key thing is to get them to work together, to get them to be COVID secure, and to make sure that actually they're not throwing holy water and garlic at Airbnb, because that is not helpful. All of these platforms are supportive of the industry and trying to drive our economy. Thank you very much, Kurt, as if by magic. But a lot of this is around destination management, not just marketing. So get your Airbnb providers and your other B&B associates involved with the DMO, and make sure that you're working together, both to upsell in terms of extending stay, but also to make sure that you're doing that destination management and visitor management piece.
Thank you. Dimitrios has also asked the question how we can manage the crowds when they all rush to hot points.
Well, I think that's a really good point, and my sympathies particularly to Bournemouth, because, you know, just as all you need is one bad image, and the media love playing it on a loop, and I would sort of see your Bournemouth crowded beach and raise you a lorry queue, but I think a lot of it is around suggesting other things. I think there are going to be a lot of people who just want to do exactly what they have always done and go to the hotspots that are not really bothered about crowds. But I would strongly suspect that there are a significant, if not double that amount, who would not want to be on a crowded beach at all and are very nervous about it. So I think whether it's the app that you were sharing earlier, Dimitrios, or whatever we can do as destinations to do that dispersal point. I mean, in my many years of working on tourism, the thing that I suppose still shocks and surprised me is the fact that people's sense of geography and knowledge is absolutely pants, you know, and they don't like to be told what to do and where to go, but you kind of have to. And so as much as we can do suggesting whether we can use social media platforms or whatever to subtly suggest, here's a hidden gem that nobody else knows about, and it's a wonderful Instagram, you know, place to go. The more we can do that, the more dispersal. That's part of the management piece. And if I leave you with one message, really, it's around, you know, the M and DMO is all about management. The marketing is the easy bit. The management's a tough bit, and that's why we need the partnership.
Absolutely, and I think that's been reflected throughout everybody's comments today around how working in collaboration is so important. So I'm pleased now to hand over to Kurt, who is the director at the Tourism Alliance. Just a brief introduction. After graduating with a first-class master's in public policy, Kurt was employed by the Department of Conservation, and then the New Zealand Tourist Board, working on national and regional tourism strategy. He moved to Britain in 1997 to work for Visit Britain as head of strategic planning with responsibility for policy, strategy, business planning and marketing evaluation. Kurt left Visit Britain in 2004 to become the director of the Tourism Alliance, an umbrella trade association for the tourism and hospitality sector that comprises over 50 industry associations that together represent almost 200,000 UK businesses. The core role of the Tourism Alliance is to lobby government on issues that support the development of the UK tourism industry. He is a member of several government advisory groups, including the Tourism Industry Council, and has written Visit England's Pink Book on accommodation legislation since 1999. Kurt is a fellow of both the Tourism Management Institute and the Association of Tourism in Higher Education. I'm delighted now to hand over to Kurt. Thank you.
Hi, hopefully you can see me and see the screen.
Yes.
All good, fantastic. I'm going to give a presentation which is slightly different from Deirdre's in two ways. One, it doesn't have wonderful pictures of Kent, and the other bit is it's different in that it doesn't have a positive aspect about it. So if you can bear with me on both those fronts, we should have a great time. Start off kind of running over some of the points that people have made previously, but I thought I'd reiterate them because it's worth pointing out the impact of COVID on the tourism industry and kind of what kind of the future holds, or the immediate future holds. It says, right. It's worth noting that kind of tourism has been hit kind of worse than very much any other industry in the UK by COVID. Over 80% of tourism businesses here have closed through the national lockdown, compared to just 24% of other businesses. So while a lot of other businesses in the economy are kind of continuing on in some shape or form, tourism businesses really struggled to be able to operate during the lockdowns. The only kind of exemptions to that are in the restaurant sector, where people can do takeaways, but when it comes to attractions, hotels, they just really can't operate at the moment. And this has had a spillover effect in terms of the number of staff on furlough. 75% of tourism employees at the moment are furloughed, compared to just 20% of employees across the economy as a whole. So it really is taking an impact, not just on the businesses themselves, but on the employees who work in the tourism industry. And that impact is really felt kind of on the finances of both the businesses and the employees. Businesses have gone through a hell of a year, and they've been using, well, a lot of them have been basically running on their reserves. And we're at the stage now that at the end of last year, 92% of businesses said that their revenue had decreased by more than 50%. And something like 65% of businesses said that they only had reserves for another 3 months. And that was at December. So you're talking about March, you're talking people and businesses kind of running on petrol fumes rather than actually having anything in the tank anymore. And to compound that, we're going to open later than any other industry, and will operate under restricted capacity for many more months. So while everyone's looking forward to coming out of lockdown, we're not going to come out of lockdown and everyone be able to go about doing whatever they want to do. We're going to come out into the tier system. We're probably going to come out with most areas being in around tier 3. And tourism businesses really can't operate in a tier 3 environment. We need to be down, tier 2, tier 1 for businesses to actually be able to operate in any meaningful form. And then even when we operate in any meaningful form, large numbers of businesses in the tourism sector won't be able to do that in any financially viable way. You know, most restaurants, most pubs, even under social distancing rules, which will continue for quite some time, just can't operate in a financially viable way under those restrictions because they just do not have the capacity to generate the revenue that they need. Then we're talking about things like the meetings, the events, the conference sectors. Those will be the very last activities to open because it's so difficult to control people's movements and maintain social distancing. So while a lot of the rest of the UK economy is looking to come out of this, we're going to be stuck in a kind of a COVID bubble for quite a few months to go. To give you an example of, this is the figures from Visit Britain on the impact that COVID had last year. So inbound tourism declined by 80%. It was only down by 80% because obviously things only closed up after the first 3 months of the year. So we lost well over £22 billion in inbound tourism revenue. On the domestic side, it declined by 62%. So you can find that together, that's a loss of tourism revenue to the UK economy of almost £80 billion last year. And if you do the maths on that, there's a standard figure, which is about £65,000 of lost tourism revenue equates to the loss of a tourism job. Well, you do the maths on the £80 billion there, and it means that if things stay as they are, then the industry will lose kind of 1.2 million people. That isn't kind of quite going to happen because basically business is desperate to stay alive and have put people on furlough. But even so, UK hospitality, their figures from December show that they have lost 600,000 people in the hospitality sector. There's an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 that have been lost in the rest of the tourism sector. So even at the moment, we're up around the kind of 800, 900,000 full-time jobs that are lost. And the sad thing about this is that it's actually an underestimate because the Visit Britain figures don't take into account two very important components of the tourism economy in the UK. They don't take account of the outbound tourism sector. So all the businesses, the travel agents, tour operators, and all the businesses that actually support them on getting people out of the country are not included in this estimate. Interestingly enough, outbound tourism actually generates about £30 billion in revenue for the UK economy. So it is not just a kind of a small component. The other thing is that these figures don't take into account the aviation sector because they're based on the revenue that people spend once they're in the UK. So it doesn't include the airports or the airlines themselves. So it's a very worrying situation about the total kind of loss of mass within the industry at the moment. Visit Britain's forecasts for this year are better, but they really aren't great. On inbound tourism expenditure, they still expect it to be down by 68% compared to 2019. Obviously, there's a number of reasons in that. It's more difficult to coordinate the COVID regimes in two countries and allow people across borders. It's also, will take time for the aviation industry to recover from this. And also, you've got factors that have now come into it, such as everyone around the world knows that there is the British version of COVID, which is much more contagious, and that's having an impact on sentiment in overseas source markets at the moment, which is going to take some effort to counter. On the domestic side, things are better, but we're still looking at a 33% reduction in revenue compared to 2019. The other thing to note about that is that even though kind of domestic tourism is forecast to be at 66% of its pre-COVID level, there are going to be winners and losers in this. We know from what happened when the lockdown ended in July last year. People want to get away from cities. They want to get to rural destinations. They want to get to seaside destinations. They want to get away from other people where they can feel safe on their holiday. So you'd expect rural seaside destinations to do well. And if you've got a form of accommodation, such as self-catering, camping, caravanning, those types of accommodation where people can control their environment and control the way that they meet other people, they'll do well. If, however, you are a city destination, then you've got a much more difficult task. People don't want to take city breaks, and trying to convince people to go to cities is going to be difficult, especially when the major attractions in cities are the things that gather people together. So they're the exhibitions, the museums, the galleries, the nightclubs, all those types of activities which will take longer to recover and force people into the same space. Those are going to take a lot of effort to turn people's perceptions and anxieties about being in close proximity to other people. So it's going to be very much a kind of a curate's egg in domestic tourism. Some people will do really well this year. Some people won't do well at all. And of course, this all depends on the smooth rollout of the vaccine, that there are no additional strains, that the vaccine has to be modified to take into account. And the other thing that's kind of slightly worrying kind of down the line for this is when you talk to the health professionals about it, what they're basically saying is that COVID will go from being a pandemic to endemic in the population. Basically, we will, they're working on the assumption that we won't get rid of coronavirus from the population in the near future, at least. So this will also have an impact on the vaccine regimes. If we get a situation where the vaccine is only effective for 6 months or even 12 months, then we're going to have to go through cycles of vaccination. And this is going to cause kind of problems about how do you know that someone has been vaccinated and how do you know that someone hasn't? How do you monitor this? What does this do for your social distancing inside your venue? There's a lot to be worked through, and this will have a kind of a major shift in how we deliver tourism product to people. At the moment, to try and kind of deal with the recovery, DCMS is developing a tourism recovery plan. And one of the major things that we've been doing as the Tourism Alliance is feeding into this recovery plan and putting down our thoughts to them about what the government should be doing to support businesses through this reopening, considering that the huge pressure that they've been under over the past year. And what we did is put together a tourism recovery plan, which had 3 stages. And those 3 stages, basically, we want to protect and retain as many tourism businesses as possible. That's the first thing, protect what you've got, as much of it, so that when we do reopen, there are businesses there. Next thing is kind of how do we rebuild, which is basically enabling businesses when they open to generate as much revenue as possible. They need to kind of rebuild their reserves as quickly as possible to be able to serve customers. And then more forward-looking is, okay, how do we build a tourism industry that is more resilient than the one that we've got today? What can we learn from this? And how can we prepare ourselves to withstand any future crisis? So I'll just go through a few points associated with each of these kind of 3 stages that we've put through to government. The first one is kind of retaining businesses. And it's important to reduce costs for businesses as much as possible because, as I said previously, they're running on petrol fumes at the moment. The first part of that is to extend and reform the business rates relief scheme. It's absolutely important that just when businesses kind of emerge from this lockdown and start reopening again, they don't get hit with a huge business rate bill. So that needs to be extended for another year. It also needs to be reformed because there were large numbers of large sectors of the tourism industry that basically didn't get business rates relief and haven't been eligible for grants throughout kind of this entire process. You know, the big ones on this are the coach operators, the tour operators, the English language schools, the events organisers. You know, those sectors have basically missed out on much of the support that was given to other parts of the economy. So reforming business rates relief and grant schemes so that these businesses can get some revenue and survive is absolutely important, because if you look at the inbound tourism market, for example, around 55% of the 28.5 billion pounds we get each year is actually delivered through tour operators selling product in overseas markets. Now, if we come out of this and Visit Britain does overseas marketing campaigns and we have the great campaign operating in overseas markets, well, that's wasted if there's no one in those markets selling product to get people over to the UK. We also need to extend the coronavirus job retention scheme with a more targeted scheme for tourism businesses, recognising that they will be late to the party when we reopen. Rather than having a general countrywide or national furlough scheme, we need a furlough scheme that recognises social distancing and the problems that tourism-related businesses will have in reopening. And we also need a rent protection scheme. This is incredibly important for large numbers of businesses that have commercial landlords. There's been a moratorium on landlords kind of being able to kick out people and allow and go get their rents. But that runs out at the end of the financial year, and we really need to replace it with a scheme that protects businesses and shares the burden of rents between the business and the landlord, rather than it just being the business that has to suffer. So once we've kind of retained as many businesses as possible, then we need to kind of help them rebuild. And extending the VAT reduction is core to this. Some interesting work that we've just done with the Cut Tourism VAT campaign shows that kind of 75% of tourism businesses we're saying that if it hadn't been for them, they may well have closed by the end of last year. Also, we need to extend it because a VAT scheme is only of benefit to businesses if businesses are open and able to sell product. So we have a lockdown at the moment, so no one's open, no one's selling any product. So the VAT reduction at the moment is basically useless and not helping the businesses at all. So it would be perverse, just as businesses reopen at the end of lockdown, for the government to take away the VAT reduction to help them and put on 20% VAT. It makes much more sense to kind of kickstart the industry by extending that VAT reduction. We also need to do things like get rid of as much regulation as possible and allow businesses to operate. One of my chief bugbears for a number of years has been the package travel regulations. These regulations mean that if you are an accommodation business, an attraction, you want to work together to provide a value-added product or package to encourage visitors, you're treated as a tourism operator or travel agent, tour operator. And basically, if you're the accommodation provider and you say, come stay with me and I'll give you tickets to the local historic house, and you fall down the stairs at the historic house, you as the B&B owner will be sued for that, because you are responsible for your customers, even though they're on someone else's property, and that's just silly. So we want to get rid of that so that businesses can work together, provide the things that customers want, and kickstart tourism. The other kind of benefit of changing the package travel regulations is for DMOs, in that DMOs would be able to undertake marketing campaigns, work with their members on developing these value-added products and sell them through websites without being deemed to be tour operators and being covered by the regulations. So it would actually generate a new funding stream for DMOs as well, which is very much needed at the moment. We also need further incentive schemes. Eat Out to Help Out, Mark II. What we've found with the first one is that it was incredibly useful at encouraging people out of their homes to re-engage in a social environment, to gain the confidence to go out and do regular activities again. And we need that, because even though a lot of Eat Out to Help Out wasn't specifically tourism related, it is a step on increasing consumer confidence. If they can go out to a restaurant and have a meal, they're more encouraged to then go out on a holiday and go for a meal somewhere else. So it's an important part of the process of rebuilding confidence in the consumers. Maybe there needs to be a city break scheme to encourage people to take city breaks for the reasons I mentioned previously. And what about, a social tourism scheme to, give out vouchers to people to be able to undertake holidays, especially during the kind of the shoulder and winter periods, to again maximize the amount of revenue that businesses can gain over the next year. Other ideas are tax incentives for investment, and also kind of further resources for domestic marketing, because domestic tourism is where it's really going to happen this year. So we want to boost it as much as possible. And on the international side, we should waive air passenger duty in for the coming year to try and encourage people to come to the UK for a holiday. How about introducing a 5-year low-cost visa for people entering the UK? This encourages people to come, but it also has the added benefit of encouraging them to reuse the visa to come back within a 5-year period. Another real benefit of having a low-cost 5-year visa, well, two more benefits from a low-cost 5-year visa. One is it helps kickstart the education industry, because if you're an overseas family, you want to send your kid to a university, if you get a low-cost 5-year visa, you can come and visit them as many times as you want during the course of their degree in the UK. So it encourages people to send their kids to UK universities. The other great thing about it from a government level is that it actually saves the government money, because every visa that the government processes, the standard visitor visa, actually loses the government around £50. So the fewer of them that they process and the more 5-year ones they do instead, the more money that they will actually save. A further way of rebuilding inbound tourism is reversing the government's decision to get rid of duty-free shopping and the retail export scheme, whereby people who spend money on goods such as Vista Village are able to claim the 20% VAT back. The government, in a fit of self-harm, decided to get rid of this scheme at the end of last year. Whereas what we should have done is actually extend it to EU visitors and make the UK, the shopping capital of Europe. It would encourage visitors from Europe to come over here, spend their time here, do some shopping. It would be a really good way of boosting inbound tourism. We also need to encourage EU visitors to postpone the phasing out of ID cards. At the moment, the government plans to phase out the use of ID cards for visitors from the EU in September this year. Really, we want that decision pushed back till next year to encourage school groups, to encourage families with children to come over here. Phasing out ID cards is just another barrier to people coming to the UK for their holiday. And again, we've got to boost international marketing. So finally, what can we do to make the UK tourism industry more resilient? Well, three things we need to do. One is to review tourism delivery structures and resource allocation in the UK. Up until now, we've really taken domestic tourism for granted, and government has concentrated on the money that it gives to Visit Britain being spent in overseas markets to generate income. This outbreak, if anything, has shown us that that is the wrong approach and that we should pay much more attention to our domestic market. That means having a really independent Visit England with sufficient resources to undertake domestic marketing. It also means looking at our subnational tourism structures, and one of the parts of the tourism plan will be to review the subnational tourism structures and the funding of them to make sure that they're more resilient going forward, because it is at the grassroots level through the DMOs that most of the tourism is generated. And we also need to come up with a English tourism strategy. It is quite bizarre in this day and age that we have a £120 billion tourism industry in England, and yet there is actually no strategy for developing it. It is a huge industry. It employs well over 2 million people. It needs a strategy. And finally, for many years, we've been lobbying for there to be an accommodation registration scheme. This was in the past kind of focused on the sharing economy and making sure that new entrants into the industry through the sharing economy were complying with rules and regulations to make sure that their accommodation was safe for visitors and that there was a level playing field for other tourism operators. But one thing that we've learned from the coronavirus outbreak is that we need an accommodation registration scheme so that we know where all the SMEs and the micro businesses within the tourism sector are, because it's incredibly important, as we've found, and incredibly difficult, as we've found, to be able to get these businesses the information that they need during the outbreak, the rules that they need to comply with, the changes of rules that are happening, what they should be doing to protect their customers, and also what support and help is available to them. And we've been doing a huge job in getting information out. Deirdre and the other DMOs have been doing a fantastic job as well. But we don't know where everyone is, and we need to know where everyone is, kind of integrate them into a communication system where we can get this information out to them in future. So that's me, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kurt. I think that's shone a very critical light on the impact of COVID on our tourism industry in the UK. And I particularly agree with you in terms of the reformation, really, of how business grants are distributed. We've seen that really acutely in Lincolnshire. For East Lindsey, we've had £60 million in the first wave to give to businesses that are under that 50,000 threshold. So obviously excluding a significant number of businesses. Does anybody have any questions? I've got one here from Emma Rees. Over to you, Emma.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Can't see myself. Oh, good. Thank you, Kurt, and thank you for everyone this morning. I found it really interesting. I'm not in tourism too much, but from Blackpool, I'm part of a community organisation that supports young people to build resilience, of all things. And that's why I'm here today, just because such a lot of our jobs are reliant on tourism. So we're organising with other partnerships an international resilience revolution conference in April 22 that's been postponed twice since September 2020. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Kurt, because you mentioned conferences and events will perhaps be last to the party. Do you think our timescale's realistic, April 2022?
Yeah, I'd certainly hope by that stage that conferences, events, exhibitions would be happening, if not as normal, in a new normal way. I think what we'll do is we'll end up with a situation where we'll have a system like is being put in place for international arrivals into the UK, where you have to have kind of pre-flight testing. We would have kind of pre-conference testing that you would have to be tested before coming into a conference or show that you have been vaccinated, go through some process to be able to kind of enter to the venue. And if you couldn't show that you had either tested or been vaccinated, then you wouldn't be allowed entry, or be allowed entry into a part of it which was away from everyone else.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I've got a question from Barrie. Kelly. He's asked, do you think that government's understanding of our sector has improved, Kurt?
I think it has in a lot of ways. You've never seen kind of tourism and hospitality feature so much in discussions in Parliament, even in the news. So it has really heightened kind of government's understanding of tourism. It's not to say that it's complete. There is a slight tendency for government to conflate hospitality with tourism and not really fully understand how the different components of the industry are all linked into this kind of horizontal chain of businesses that depend on each other. They think if you protect kind of one part of it over here, you've protected tourism. But if you don't protect, for example, the coach operators, then the attractions suffer because there's no coach trips coming to them. The hotels, will suffer because they rely on coach tourism, especially in the shoulder and winter seasons to generate revenue. It's a very kind of interconnected ecosystem of tourism businesses. I think the full understanding of this ecosystem and how to maintain it isn't quite there, but certainly they are moving in the right direction.
Thank you. And Chris has specifically asked what could be done to help the ferry and cruise industries and their passengers. He's from the White Cliffs country.
Yeah, I think the cruise industry, ferry industry, again, will go the same way as airlines and where I think conferences and events will go in terms of the cruise industry is relatively easy. You get people to test before they come on or show that they are have been vaccinated. That would be a very easy step forward. And I think one or two of the cruise companies are introducing that at the moment. So I can see the same thing happening for other parts of the sector as well.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time because we're running slightly behind. So I'm now pleased to hand over to Kathryn Davis, who is the head of tourism at Destination Bristol. She joined Destination Bristol in 2000 when it was the Bristol Tourism and Conference Bureau as a marketing executive looking after print and PR. She's now the head of tourism, overseeing the marketing, conference, membership and commercial activities, plus managing the research programme, development opportunities and stakeholder relations. So I'm pleased now to hand over to Kathryn. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. I am now going to share my presentation. She says optimistically. bear with me 1 second while I sort, there it is, right. So, good morning, everyone. As Lydia said, my name is Kathryn Davis. I'm Head of Tourism at Destination Bristol. And I've also recently been interim Chief Exec at Visit Bath. So this presentation is really going to give you a bit of a response from Bristol and Bath. So currently 2 separate organisations. Destination Bristol's been around since '99. Most people will know from the consumer brand of Visit Bristol, but we also have Meet Bristol, which is our meetings and events brand. Public-private partnership, but the company, the DMO part is only half of the company. The other half of the company actually manage business improvement districts. There's 2 at the moment and a 3rd one going to ballot. Visit Bath was formed in 2003 as Bath Tourism Plus, also as a public-private partnership. Operated the award-winning Bath Christmas Market, which of course sadly didn't take place in 2020 and what would have been its 20th anniversary. And so during this period, we've been trying to manage between 2 destinations and the impact of COVID. And I'll come on to the operational governance and structure of what that might look like in the future. But sadly, we had to close the Visitor Information Centre. When we closed it for COVID in March in Bath, we were unable to reopen. And so it's one of a number of casualties for visitor information centres that's been expedited by the pandemic. Also, the Bristol one is going to close as well. So, you know, you've seen some real impacts in terms of services. I've put that in not because I'm going to cast out on anyone's geography, but just to show you how close these 2 destinations are. They're only 12 miles apart. And this is important when we start to look at what we're going to be doing as a response to COVID, but also to show that the phenomenal amount of rural space around the cities, which we think has had an impact in terms of the return for visitors in between the various lockdowns. Also, in this region, there are 4 unitary authorities. And during the pandemic, and when we went into the tier system, most of them were operating in different tiers, which made it incredibly difficult in terms of managing a response for visitors coming in who don't necessarily appreciate where the boundaries are. And also the impact on our core markets, particularly along the M4 between Cardiff and London. So to put the visitor economy into context, 2019, like many, it was the best year we'd ever had in the west of England. You can see the day visits there. The spend, roughly half the spend comes into Bristol and the other half goes into the other 3 unitary authorities. Baines is Bath and North East Somerset, and South Gloucestershire, confusingly, is a bit to the north, and North Somerset is a bit to the south. From the staying visits in the west of England, again, Bristol has the dominant number of staying visits as it has the biggest accommodation stock in the region. And you can see there the impact of domestic and overseas trips. And just to put it all in one place, and the magic number that everyone likes to see, £2.3 billion from the visitor economy into the west of England, employing 45,500 people. Now, like everybody else, the impact of the pandemic has been nothing short of devastating. We keep a business barometer, which goes back to the start of the company around '99. And so while people have come and gone from that survey, looking and comparing the same businesses versus 2019 and 2020, for central Bristol, the attractions, we saw a drop of 67% in 2020 compared with 2019. Now, what we found, and a lot of other destinations I think have found this, is that we were expecting, when we were planning our response to reopen, everything to reopen in July, and of course it didn't. And there was a staggered opening.
with some venues not being able to open at all. And that was a very difficult message to go to the consumer with. In fact, in Bristol, we only had 2 of our main attractions that opened in July. In Bath, the drop-off was slightly higher at 77%. And that was as a result of some venues not opening at all, because it was incredibly difficult to socially distance, particularly in old heritage buildings, but also to ensure that social spacing was put into place, that the visitor flow was appropriate. And again, it's those COVID restrictions. Now compare that to the rural area. I showed you the map. We also work with a number of venues who supply us data from when they're in that area. And the drop off for 2020 for our rural attractions was just -4%. So a huge difference between the city-based venues and the countryside venues, most of which had an outdoor experience against the city destinations, which were almost exclusively indoor experiences. You can also see there the decline in hotel occupancy, which I have to say probably wasn't as bad as we're expecting from an occupancy perspective. However, if you look at the decline in RevPAR, that's a huge concern for the businesses operating. Again, there were issues with in and out of tiers, and what does that mean? But I think one of the interesting things that we noticed with hotels was that it wasn't there wasn't a uniform platform for occupancy. 5-star hotels, boutique experiences, and experience being the word, actually did much, much better than a lot of our hotels that are generally quite corporate and serve the business events market, serve the tour operator market very, very well in normal times. And I think it was that mid-market that suffered most. I think, again, so there was some interest in budget, and price made a difference at the bottom end of the market. But we saw some phenomenal rates coming through in July and August. We've recently undertaken a survey with businesses, and this was just ahead of the announcement of national lockdown. And at that point in Bristol, we saw 55% of our businesses that have made redundancies, and a further 11% saying, oh, not yet, but it's looking likely. The figure, again, slightly lower in Bath, but there was more of an uncertainty there about what was coming in the future. We also, in our survey, asked about the impact of government support. Most businesses had taken advantage of the furlough scheme and accepted the grants where they could. But the feeling was now it's getting tougher and it's getting harder. And I think the initial lockdown, they managed okay, but as Kurt said, those resources are running very thin now. So we have huge concerns over what industry we will have at the time that everyone starts to reopen. We also asked our businesses when they expected to recover. And it's quite interesting because we saw anything from summer 2021 through to 2024. Obviously, there was a variance with the business depending on whether they were primarily domestic or international. But generally, it was more towards 2022. So there's not an expectation that 2021 will be the big bonanza year. So in terms of what we're looking at in our recovery, one of the things that the pandemic has taught us, and the question came from Barrie about our government taking tourism more seriously, or do they understand the industry a little bit more? We found that on a local level as well. So from our combined authorities, from our local authorities, there has seemed to have been an opportunity to put the spotlight on the visitor economy and a little bit more of an understanding of what that actually is. Now, I think we hosted the last trade event in Bristol in February, where we hosted the UK Inbound event. And that was a kind of opportunity to bring some of our local stakeholders together. But since then, we've been part of the Combined Authority Economic Plan. Tourism's been at the heart of the city recovery plans. And it's been an incredible time for us to actually spotlight the impact on the destinations and the role of tourism, not just in the decline of tourism during this time, but also its role in the recovery. Now, this is our response in terms of the opening from version 1, and again highlighting how we pulled those partnerships together. So if you just look at the bottom there with Bath, with those logos, it was the Business Improvement District working with the festivals, working with the local authority and the DMO. So it was a way of bringing people together to work collaboratively. And the same in Bristol. This was a campaign that was paid for by the Business Improvement District, but from the DMO side came together to help promote it, and was actually featured all over the world. Very, very simple, working on the concept of street art and putting the hearts together to encourage people to sit and socially space in the parks around the city. And when it comes to the staycations and domestic tourism, it's still the bread and butter of the destinations. 76% of all staying visits were domestic, but obviously the mismatch for us is the spend. It's only responsible for 60% of the spend. So our challenge is, how do we get our domestic audiences to stay a bit longer and spend a bit more until we can start to bring those international audiences back in. And those international audiences are critical. And what we've managed to do is to maintain contact with our DMCs, with our tour operators, to ensure that when we are ready to go and when we are ready to move again, that we're in a position to welcome them back as soon as possible. Even down to creating new itineraries, which may or may not ever be sold off the back of something that's happening at the moment. And again, as Kurt said, the business events industry, another thing that we've been pushing really hard for is to understand the role of the business events industry in relation to the visitor economy. Again, it will be the last to come back, but the hotels, particularly those geared up towards residential conference hotels, are going to have had a torrid time. Some of them we work with are still closed. How do we help them to recover, and how do we bring people back? So focusing on the opportunities, that business events side of things, looking at this wonderful leisure concept, and now the latest one being Staycations. So in terms of supporting that sector, who are primarily business hotels, what facilities have they got? How can we work with them to base, so that people, if they're working from home and can continue to work from home, can they enjoy a break at the same from their own house? So they can do things in the evenings when it's safe to do so, but they're still able to maintain work. So there's a piece of work that we're looking at about how we can support them, that kind of mid-market 4-star hotel. Again, slowing things down. How can we get people to extend stay? It's about building itineraries, but this isn't a kind of itinerary development, which is now you go here, now you go here, now you go here. It's making sure we give people time to explore. Some of that we're working on some audio tours that then will take people, move people around in a very different way. And creating inspiration. We're doing a lot of that at the moment in terms of our social channels, what people can do when they can return again. And it's ensuring that it's not just showing them pictures at the moment, it's how we can then build that into the experience when they return. And it is experience, it's all about the experience. So that there's a piece of work that we've been doing to work with businesses. So it's presenting, it's not just I'm going to a museum, what is the experience once you're there? And finally, focusing on the natural landscapes. As I said, we have two big cities, one large metropolitan city destination, one heritage city, but it's how we blend in the natural landscapes, even making the opportunity to travel to the region and part of the experience. And indeed, if we're encouraging people to stay longer and spend more, how we can connect these two destinations, because you can cycle between them, you can get the train between them, you can walk between them if you really wanted to, and you can get a boat between them. So again, normally we would present the two destinations primarily to an international market, and there may be opportunities for us to do this on a domestic level. Our focus is going to be on what makes us different. While we have developed campaigns and we're working on the Visit England, Enjoy the Everyday campaigns, it's going to be product led. It will depend on what's open. It will depend on what you can do. It will depend on consumer sentiment. We're very fortunate in that we've got new attractions opening in Bath, we've got new hotels opening in Bristol. So there will be new things to talk about, as well as supporting those that are already open. But again, flexibility is going to be absolutely critical, and making sure that we're working with the businesses so that should everything be locked down again, or if there's any change to opening, what happens with tickets that are booked for specific spots. We are in the process of rewriting business plans, and one of the things that we're doing is bringing in the SDGs to reflect the SDGs in our business plan. So we are very much about responsible behaviour and responsible travel. That we've seen the move towards the private vehicle, which is understandable at this time. But we, if you are coming into a destination, leaving the car, and then how you experience a destination without the carbon impact, how you support local supply chains, how you support small local businesses. So again, this is about supply chains and making sure that when we are able to return, that we're making good choices and good decisions. And we feel that as a DMO, we have the responsibility to help drive that message. And again, digital is everything for us. It's interesting that even during a time when visits to DMO websites were obviously up and down constantly, in the summer, the Visit Bath website actually was higher than it was, visits to the site were higher than it was in 2019. In Bristol, despite not achieving our targets this year, we were still ahead. Our visitor traffic was the same as 2015. I have to say that content that we built around Eat Out to Help Out saved us in the summer and was a phenomenal driver of traffic. But we took the opportunities to develop communications in areas that people were talking about online anyway. Not only did it help us drive traffic to our site, but then support the businesses that we work with who had an interest in the same areas. And finally, when all else fails, we've always got Bridgerton. So 63 million people worldwide, we hope, have been inspired to visit Bath when they can in the future. So we're actually working to develop product around this. And I saw the first Bridgerton itinerary from a tour operator yesterday. So this is something that we will hopefully continue to work with. Obviously not just Bridgerton, but again, taking the opportunities of the new and the seen on screen for inspiration. But one thing that I must highlight is the mood has changed. This is a direct feedback from social postings. So when we were in lockdown 1, even lockdown 2, promoting local walks, promoting deliveries and takeaways was standard fare. During this current lockdown, we've seen lots of public comments about not encouraging people to walk in places. You mentioned about hotspots. So we've really had to temper how we talk about walks. So it's not just all about promoting local walks in the area. Again, takeaways, we've had to soften the message about takeaways and talk more about deliveries. And there have been some not vicious attacks, but definitely barbed comments. And so again, we're staying flexible and reflecting the mood. And we think that when things start to open up, we're going to have to kind of read the room on that case as well, because it is going to be different. I talked about some structural and governance change and did show you at the start just how close the destinations are together. One of the programs that we're working on is to create a new DMO for the region. So instead of having 2 DMOs that sit side by side, is creation of a regional destination management organisation that provides strong B2B services. That's the travel trade, the convention bureau service, one membership programme, consolidated research, whilst at the same time maintaining the strong consumer brands of Visit Bristol and Visit Bath. We're quite a long way through this journey, and we will all keep you in touch with how it goes. But this has been driven forward through COVID and in need to collaborate. When you've got 2 DMOs sat side by side, asking businesses to choose or to pay into 2, it is quite frankly not the right thing to do at the moment or ever. So by providing a one-stop shop with one set of services that's slightly different in terms of their audiences, but gives them the opportunity to have more people supporting them. I'm really excited about it. It's something that we've been wanting to do for a long time. It's made sense, and now we're going through the formal structural changes. And so our priorities, and that, you know, for the next coming months, is really to listen to our businesses, what they want and need, and making sure that we deliver that when they need it as much as possible, and to keep the lobbying and support for them. In terms of our marketing, we're going to have to remain agile and innovative. We've used our digital platforms to try things. Use our social audiences to try things. We measure, we send out A/B testing in our e-newsletters, because if we can use that flexibility in our digital communications to understand what's working with the customer, then we can build on it. And it's a straightforward process. If you do something that works, you do more of it. If you do something that doesn't work, you don't do that anymore. And I think innovation in the digital space gives us lots of opportunity to grow for the future. Well, we've had all these supportive partnerships as we reopened for the first and then second time. It's a huge opportunity for us to nurture these partnerships. We don't want them just to be there for a reopening and then disappear. It's ensuring that we maintain this collaborative approach and develop it further. And like the Bridgerton effect, it's taking the opportunities where we can. And some of this is done by the social media eavesdropping, but it's understanding the trends. It's working with people who understand the trends and maximizing the opportunities where we can. And finally, communicate responsibly. As I said, we've had our fingers burnt recently with content that was absolutely fine 6 weeks ago, which now just isn't. So there is an element of continuing to read the room and reflecting and changing your communication message depending on the public response. The last thing that we want to do is to alienate anybody from visiting in the future, and we're only going to do that by being agile and quick to learn from where we are now. So that was a bit of a gallop through, but now if anybody's got any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Kathryn. There are a couple of questions in the chat. One is, are both the Bath and Bristol visitor information centres permanently closed, or will they reopen?
At the moment, the Bristol one's going to be closing at the end of March. Visitor information centres are incredibly expensive to operate. High staffing costs if you're in the centre of town, high rental costs. While we consolidate the DMO services, I think it's likely that there'll be a physical building in the short term. In the medium to long term, I think that, you know, we may be looking at something to come back, whether we're the best agency to deliver that, or whether that's something that can be delivered in partnership with business improvement districts. But I think the important thing is it gives us it's given us a chance to look and reflect about what's actually needed, rather than do what we've always done because we've always done it.
Thank you. I'm going to save Dimitrios' question till the Q&A and move on now to Barrie Kelly's presentation. Barrie is Chief Executive of Visit Greenwich. He joined Visit Greenwich in January 2014, having previously worked at Marketing Cheshire as Director of Client Services, working on inward investment and tourism agendas. Prior to that, he worked at economic development body St Helens Chamber as Marketing and Development Director, helping them to be recognised nationally as Chamber of the Year in 2010. Previous to that, he worked at Visit Chester and Cheshire as Commercial Director and Director of Operations over a 4-year period. Earlier in his career, he worked at the Mersey Partnership for 6 years as Head of Marketing and Commercial Development, leading on both inward investment and tourism. Barrie has been recognised within the industry with a number of prominent awards, including the UK Inbound DMO of the Year in 2017, a CIM award for brand repositioning, and an IPA commendation for advertising effectiveness. And I'm very pleased to hand over to Barrie. Thank you.
And despite all that, I can't use Zoom very well. Is this working? Can you see?
It is. Yes, we can see it.
I'm very conscious I've got the graveyard slot, so thank you for that, Lydia. I'm not sure.
Not my decision.
I'm not sure if there's anything left to say, to be honest. I'll be really quick, and I'm conscious you're probably tired and hungry. I'll try and focus on one or two things that maybe Deirdre or Kathryn didn't cover too much, because I think there's obviously huge duplication. So I'll look at, from a Greenwich perspective, Greenwich means recovery time. What's been the impact on destination management in general? So this is less of an advert for Greenwich and more really just my thoughts about really what's happened and what might come next. There's some pictures of London looking very, very quiet. So yeah, Greenwich perspective, challenges at a destination level and the DMO level, which are different but linked. What I think has worked and what hasn't worked. Are there any positives from this mess at all? And then some thoughts on what the future might hold. My slides aren't as pretty as Kathryn's either, so I apologize for that. I did them myself, as you can tell. So devastation at a destination level. Half of our market is overseas, all gone, and obviously the local markets don't spend the same, and they're not the same in size. So we've lost over half of our income. I'm not sure if that works with Kurt's formula, but it's roughly about 6,000 jobs we think are at risk or lost. I think from a London perspective, London has been impacted worse than any other place in the country because of Brexit, terrorism stuff from a couple of years ago, plus what's happened with the pandemic. And London is on its knees, and the figures there for central London are more like 80% income lost. You know, hotels in London operating on 10% occupancy level. You just never see anything like it. Founded on the local tourism agenda. So obviously everyone's jumped to going local for obvious reasons, and there is an opportunity there. But we found it quite difficult actually. We just thought you think going local is really easy, but actually we encountered a bit of politics. Again, Kathryn mentioned some of the other kind of the local dimension on social media about. So very, very careful with your tone of message. A lot more scrutiny from politicians and local councillors when you move local. And I think the team found it probably a little more difficult than you'd kind of think, really. It's not just like flicking a switch. Partnership working, interesting. I think that obviously working with less partners, we've lost about a third of our partners, but actually, in many respects, the partnership working has probably improved, certainly at the strategic level. And I think in times of adversity, people pull together in a way. And I've seen, hotels and attractions working together in a way that they never would have done or never needed to do before the pandemic. I think just generally morale, morale within the DMO, morale in partnerland, managing activities and trying to be positive always, when actually sometimes you're not feeling very positive. It's very, very difficult, I think, to kind of get that balance between optimism and realism. So I think kind of managing morale internally and externally is still an issue. So we went local. I'm not going to give you a huge Greenwich advert here, but the opportunity here is that local people have never great tourists, and that's particularly the case in Greenwich. So our whole proposition was, listen, the tourists are away, enjoy yourself, get to know Greenwich in a way that you never really had the chance, because the pubs are not full of tourists anymore and the attractions aren't either. So we went local, and the council invested a lot of money in new events, big residence rainbow and laser shows, and we packaged existing events, and we got about 50 special offers. So we got our partners to come up with a local offer just for local people, and also for people working on the front line and NHS, and that worked really well. So it was a really combination of special, unique offers and really a red carpet for local people, really. And it did actually have an impact, but it was a bit harder than we probably thought. And I'll skip you the advert. Looking at the impact on footfall, this is the crude measure, but you'll see on the left-hand side, Greenwich there, you see the campaign hitting around May time, and you'll see from June onwards, massive increases in footfall, not just down to our activity, but confidence in general, and obviously the government's Help Out to Eat Out scheme. But you'll notice that even though the figures are going up, still probably half what you'd normally expect. So local people came in and filled the void partially, but local people behave differently, spend differently, and the conversion to, say, attractions and hotels, as you can imagine, was much lower, whereas high street and retail was obviously quite good. And the October slide, obviously things started to go bad from October onwards. So what I'd say is that the local opportunity was an opportunity to build a Greenwich brand locally, but local is not the answer, because you know, foreign tourists spend a lot more money, as we know. Some challenges from a DMO level. I'm not sure if this was covered too much by my colleagues. We moved obviously heavily into the business support agenda and tried to simplify everything, because we didn't really have much of the skills in-house really. So we had to bring in specialists who we knew who could give specialist advice on legal issues, travel legislation, insurance, all that kind of stuff, which we did. And but I think our role here was to simplify matters, because I think the whole landscape of business support, incredibly complicated. Every single day was a different message coming from government, and you're keeping on top of what was happening was quite hard. And I think we added value as a DMO by simplification. We kind of cut through all the nonsense and really tried to make it as user-friendly and simple. But again, a lot of pressure on the DMO, because having to move very, very quickly all the time as messages, and every single day a new kind of fund was appearing. I found management actually really quite hard. I think that managing people through Zoom is really quite difficult, because you can't really get the feeling of your team, can you? When you're looking at people with a poker face on screen, I think it's very, very hard to manage people and to manage partners. So I think one of the biggest challenges we've had is actually people management and stakeholder management through this kind of virtual medium. And that's one reason why actually I'm quite confident that the bounce back will be strong, because I think people are actually sick to death of Zoom and all the other platforms. Wellbeing and wellness was a big issue for us. We did quite a lot of help on mental health and support and counselling for our team and for our partners, because some people really breezed through this pandemic, but other people were really struggling and crumbled. And I think you kind of learn a lot about people when you're in times of adversity. So I think, and that will continue. I think I've seen a lot of strange behaviour in the last 12 months because people have been under incredible pressure, incredible stress, and I just don't think you can just assume that because everyone's got a nice poker face on Zoom that everything's fine, because actually when you start to probe around, it isn't. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Zoom. I think it's here to stay for certain reasons, but I think people really need to be with people, particularly in our sector. And of course, the other obvious challenge is money. We've lost about a third of our membership income. I think all DMOs have, and that's going to be, I think this year is going to be even worse. And I'm not sure what support will be around. So the support we've got has more than made up for the membership income, but actually I think the next 12 months will be even harder. So what's worked well and not so well? The furlough scheme was, I think, brilliant for our sector, but I think we need more of it moving forward, more than any other sector. I hope the government will take a sectoral approach, because I think the next 12 months are probably, in some ways, could be tougher. There's a real lag in our sector, the impact. So I think furlough, huge impact. I was really pleasantly surprised at Visit Britain, Visit England. They've really helped us and other DMOs, and who'd ever thought that they would be funding DMOs, and that's been a real lifesaver, and that's really taken the pressure off a little bit. So we've tapped into that funding stream from Visit England. I think the VAT reductions have worked well. I know Kurt wants them to stay. And the culture grants, they've worked really well. A lot of our partners have received millions of pounds for that. Some of the grants, though, that are coming around, the ones that will be going through councils, particularly, or through in London, I've been applying for them, but really complicated and burdensome, and the take-up actually is really low. I know there are millions of pounds are sat there in councils that are not being accessed by SMEs, because one, maybe they don't understand that it's there for them. They don't understand maybe how it's quite easier than you think. It's not like you're kind of bidding for something. You're not kind of having to present a business plan. It's there if you need it. All you have to prove is that you're eligible. But I think that businesses don't really understand. I think the process is complicated, and we're trying to help the council boost demand for that. But there are hundreds of businesses who are not accessing the local grants. I think local marketing is interesting. I think we found the politics very different. I like a lot more scrutiny around what we say and the tone of our messaging. I think that was something to navigate throughout the summer. Help Out to Eat Out. certainly I think did have a huge impact, but at what cost? I mean, it was maybe too much in such a short period of time, and in many ways maybe probably cause further problems down the line. But like I say, from a HR viewpoint, I think you find out a lot about people during adversity, and in many ways there's been quite some people I know really stepped up and surprised me, and some other people have done the opposite. So I think that's been interesting. Any positives from this mess? Obviously the environment. I think moving forward, this kind of work-life balance will improve. This kind of 2-2-1 strategy, 2 days in the office, 2 at home, 1 flexible, something that we will be employing. I think it actually might make travelling through London on the tube actually pleasurable once we get back. That could improve. Cashless society, I think that's probably better, certainly better for the government and tax. A big one for London, I think cycling, electric bikes, scooters, I think you're going to see a lot more of that in cities. I think that's a good thing. So I think Greenwich is, we're trying to make ourselves more cycling friendly. I think partnership working, actually, fewer partners, but maybe working better because partners are having to pull together in a way that they didn't before. And I do think, trying to be optimistic, there's huge latent demand, and there are lots of people who've been saving money the last 12 months. You're not going on holiday, not going out, not traveling to work. So there is money out there, and there is a huge pent-up demand that I think will be unleashed upon us after Easter, hopefully. Okay, last couple of slides. What's the future like? I think this year will be tough. I think the first half of the year will be tough. I think from August, September, you might start to see the first signs of normality. Full recovery, I keep hearing different figures. I'm an optimist. I think you're back to 2019 figures, hopefully around 22, 23, 24. But I think something we're trying to capitalise on in Greenwich, because it fits our brand, is this move towards slow tourism. You know, people taking your time, chilling out more, walking, cycling, outdoor spaces, exercise, not rushing around and taking selfies in front of, you know, Big Ben, and so less of a trolley dash and more on slow tourism. I think sustainability is going to be taken far more seriously by visitors and local people. I think in London, like I said, a lot of people travelling differently. I think people will definitely be keeping away from some of the public transport and will be walking and cycling around more. I think the smart city agenda will accelerate how technology can help places become more effective and more efficient. Greenwich has just gone carbon neutral today, I'm just being told. I've just got my email. I'll have an impact on regeneration. Clearly, the next 12 months is all domestic, all staycation, all local, and I think everyone will be doing that. On the business side, I think conferences will come back from the summer. But I think you're going to see a lot more hybrid formats, so maybe smaller events, but using technology to bring in a virtual audience and a kind of a blended experience. I think you'll see more of that. And just to finish on a positive note, one of our board directors says, once the vaccinations reach 20 million, once we get past Easter, confidence is high, demand will be high, and basically bring it on. That's it from Greenwich.
Thank you, Barrie. So if I could just ask Jack, do you want to go straight to our Q&A now?
Yeah, we can move straight either into, if there are any follow-up questions for Barrie, we can go with them. If not, we can move straight into the panel discussion.
I can't see any questions for Barrie immediately. I've got one, Barrie, if you don't mind, in terms of how you've had to adapt your messages with businesses and then with kind of your local authorities, particularly in terms of that funding difficulties.
What do you mean exactly?
So have you, so for example, your communication, you were saying in the early days in terms of your politics locally was having an impact on that. So how did you adapt that to reflect that?
Well, we had to work much closer with the council than we normally do. So we were meeting with the council on an almost daily basis. So actually we delivered the local campaign actually in unison with the council, because they've obviously got different routes to market. They can also reach every household. But also they had a lot of information on some kind of hidden nooks and crannies of Greenwich that maybe we would obviously usually ignore, because when you talk to tourists, they just want, you know, more of the headline stuff. yeah, so I think just generally much closer working with the politicians and the executive team.
Thank you, Barrie. So if I can open it up to the whole range of speakers now that we've had this morning, first of all, to thank them for their input to shine a light on the impact that we've had on tourism from COVID, but also some of the suggestions of how we reimagine tourism going forward. If anybody would like to raise their hand or post a question in the chat box. Or Jack, is there anything that was on your list of topics for today that you have either heard or not heard or want to?
I can come up certainly with a couple of topics, which I'll get ready now.
We've got Professor Dimitrios first.
Yeah, go ahead, Dimitrios.
Thank you. A couple of things. I think people don't need to forget that we're almost 100,000 people have died in this country from COVID, and the situation we've got on NHS. And I think, you know, as marketeers, we of course would like to jump in and sell our places, and of course support our industry and our people. But the situation is really serious, and I think that's something that needs to come into the discussion. The other thing that I was thinking when Kathryn was speaking, Deirdre was speaking, and then Kurt was speaking, is that which are the companies and which are the operators that they are doing well? Are they the ones that they were competent beforehand, and have they adapted to the situation much more successfully? And which are the ones that are actually failing? I think that's it may be a correlation between the level of competence and the performance of organizations. And somehow, can we learn from those who did well and help others to kind of take best example, best practice?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting in that I take your point that those that weren't doing well quickly fell by the wayside. There were some that fell by the wayside quite early on. Now we've seen some micro businesses who just can't adapt. So particularly around reductions in seating capacity early on for the food and drink sector, it was almost impossible for them to turn around their business, and so they did adapt, but they were able to adapt because it was the summer. Now, when you know all sorts of businesses trying things, and if they got funding and they managed to succeed, then great. I think the challenge is some people just couldn't open their doors and just couldn't operate. And so they've effectively mothballed the businesses, they've made people redundant, and are just hoping at some point that they can reopen. The challenges that we've also seen, and Barrie talks a lot about membership. We've seen some membership cancellations, and I've never seen membership cancellations come through where people have actually on their kind of cancellation document have said, apologies, we don't want to do this, but our owners are not giving us any money to go forward. So the variance in the businesses has been those that have control locally and those that don't as well, not just in their work with us, but the impact on welcoming people back in and their survival. There are some businesses that we've got that haven't opened yet, and I don't know if they will.
You're on mute, Lydia.
Thank you, Kathryn. Sorry. We've got a quick question from Alex Holmes about what the DMO partners feel are the key trends for them in terms of structures and activities moving forward. If I can direct that first to Kathryn, because of your structure changing within Bath and Bristol.
Sorry, can you say that? I just had someone shouting at me in the background and I missed it completely. Sorry.
No problem. What DMO partners feel are the key trends for them in terms of structures and activities moving forward?
I mean, for us, it's bringing, you know, once we can get the operation of a new DMO up and running, it's making sure we bring the partners with us, and we've been very careful through the whole process, which is why we've been delivering all the surveys and asking all the questions to make sure that people understand the comfort behind this. This isn't creating one big new destination. This is creating a support structure that's there for them. In terms of key trends moving forward, I think it's going to be really interesting, because we're going to have to be so adaptable with our themes going forward, because normally, you know, you have your business plan and you go, right, we know what the trends are, we know what the themes are, we know what our plan is. And we're just going to have to be so agile on this, because, you know, I can't tell you, and Barrie, you know, Barrie articulated this really, really well, what sort of membership income we're going to have from April 21 onwards. We don't know what support packages are going to be there from April 21 afterwards, so we can make all the plans in the world. But if the money doesn't come in, then it's going to be a very different story. So, you know, we have our optimistic, and then we have our kind of worst case scenario. And the reality is it will probably be somewhere in the middle.
Would you like to put into that, Deirdre?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting is that every speaker's spoken about the importance of collaboration, the importance of public and private sector partnerships, and that's how DMOs work well. If both sides of the spectrum are involved in the visitor economy. The difficulty you have is that the private sector will effectively pay for marketing, but they won't pay for business support, although they need it. And all of us have talked about the fact that the vast majority of what we've done for the last year has been that business support. It's incredibly labor intensive. You've got to be incredibly agile, as Barrie was saying. The guidance was changing at one point almost on a daily basis. You've got businesses in distress calling, you know, the team. You've got to be able to respond, and in order to keep the industry going. But all of that work is not really funded by the private sector. It's funded to a degree by the public sector. And I don't think there's a destination management organization in the country that is funded to that level as a kind of core operating costs. All of us have got a sort of multiplicity of funding streams, which in themselves, being able to kind of stitch all that together is quite a lot of work. And I think you take one of those streams away and things start to kind of really get quite difficult quite quickly. And, you know, I think we're very conscious as an organisation that has got, you know, a reasonable amount of resource in terms of staffing, that we're one of the lucky ones, and we've still found it tough, and we've lost lots of membership. But there will be lots and lots of DMOs around the country that won't survive just at the time when the businesses need them most. And I think the government's got to recognise that, that actually, you know, this industry, we talked earlier about the fact that the visitor economy has suddenly gone up a political agenda that it, you know, for all the wrong reasons that it was never on before. But actually, in order to, you know, to make sure that it's getting this sort of press and coverage for the right reasons, it will need that infrastructure and that support, both from local authorities and from national organisations. But I think the quicker we can get away from counting the pennies, trying to work out how we're going to survive, you know, the better, because we need to be able to provide a bedrock of business support probably for the next 3 years, but also progressively start to develop some really compelling marketing campaigns in order to capitalise on that pent-up demand that many businesses talked about.
Thank you, Deirdre. I can see Kurt nodding his head. Can I hand over to you, Kurt? I think particularly in terms of that government support, I know a lot of DMOs have benefited from the grant system that has been handed out from Visit England.
Yeah, I think what the outbreak has shown is that we don't have a sustainable subnational tourism structure in England, and it's a real failing. Just at the time that businesses really need the support of their DMOs. The DMOs are laying off their own staff, and can't provide the support that these businesses need in their hour of want. And it goes back kind of many years to kind of many different political parties making decisions, but we've gone from a stage where we had kind of regional tourist boards, which everyone kind of knew what they did. They got kind of about a third of their funding from central government. Then we went to the regional development agencies, which had £60 million of funding. And then kind of when they got disbanded, everyone kind of just got cut loose and, were basically told to fend for themselves. And that was kind of okay when kind of councils were in the position of being able to put money into DMOs and help them along. But as we've seen over the last 10 years, the amount of funding that councils have been able to put into DMOs has reduced by about 60%. And that's in real terms, let alone, kind of nominal, that's nominal terms. So, it's a structure that isn't working, isn't providing the support that businesses and kind of local economies need. And, desperately needs government to come in and say, okay, we need to sort this out. We need to get a structure in place that absolutely works. We need to provide DMOs with a sustainable funding mechanism. Now, that's whether that's through central government, whether that's something to do with the rating scheme, I don't really mind, but it does need to be sorted, because this has exposed kind of the fragility of the system that we're operating under at the moment.
That fits in well with Claire's comment. She's asked, have you found that business improvement districts dilute support for or membership of destination management organisations? I know, Kathryn, you've got responsibility for 2 bids, is it, within Bristol?
Yeah, so there's under the Destination Bristol umbrella, the DMO sits to the left and the bids sit to the right. We do work in partnership, but obviously they have to have different business plans that their stakeholders want, because that yes, there are tourism and hospitality businesses within those bids, but there's also a lot of offices and a lot of other businesses who had nothing to do with the day-to-day operation of the DMO. So they're part of, we're within the same organisation. We do work together. And I know when the Bristol City Centre bid was developed a few years ago, we had a real nervousness, because you were looking at about 35% of our members were in that patch. And were we, literally cutting off our nose to spite our face with that? It takes a lot of management and a lot of work, but, again, we do work together. We can provide services for the bid. Their core operation is not bringing visitors in. They're responsible for a lot of the hygiene factors that people will remember while they're there. So making sure, buildings are clean and tidy, and that things are delivered when they should be, and we're very careful, and there's a lot of stuff that takes place internally to make sure that we're not kind of nipping at each other's heels. And in Bath, there's a bid in Bath that's just up for renewal now. Again, we've been very, very careful to understand what our role is and what their role is, and making sure that, again, that we are working together and not overlapping. I think it all comes down to people and relationships, and we've seen some that go very, very sour very, very quickly. So it is a relationship. It's like any relationship, you have to work really, really hard at it, but there are benefits there.
Thank you, Kathryn. Got a question from Lily at Bath Spa University. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, it's Lee from Bath Spa University. So thank you very much for this conference. It's very interesting, lots of knowledge that people have reviewed. It's really interesting. My question is, it seems to me that the educating the tourists and visitors are quite important. Tell them how to follow, what to follow to secure the industry as a COVID secure environment for all the visitors, also people working in the industry. So my question is, what's the panel's view in terms of when comes to educating tourists and the visitors? who should be taking the key responsibility? Do you think if policy or even harder regulation from the government would help to build back our social solidarity, or do the opposite? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to answer that question? I know we've got a representative. Oh, Deirdre, thank you.
I just, I suppose a micro example. We did some collaboration with our food producing sister organisation called Produced in Kent, which is around the kind of buy your local, support your local activity that many DMOs have done over the summer. But one of the things we got people to do was sign up to what a caring customer pledge, which particularly during Eat Out to Help Out was about, you know, buying local, and when you go out, you know, behaving responsibly, following all the guidance, or if you couldn't, you know, paying it forward gifting, and continuing to support local once things return to normal. So, and we ran a competition around it. And actually, I think lots of people are trying to do the right thing, are trying to be COVID compliant. And I think the more that we can encourage good behaviour and highlight good behaviour, the better. Lots of our businesses are doing amazing stuff. Dimitrios, you know, highlighted that, you know, the work that many of the hospitality industry have been doing during to support community activity. So I think all of that's really important. I think at the very kind of high level, the other end of the spectrum, I think, you know, I mean, there's going to be lots of discussions around, you know, either test and release or vaccine passports or whatever that's in terms of getting international or events business working again. And I think the key thing with that is, as Gloria said at the outset, making sure there is that mutual recognition of whatever the structure is that we are going to do. But I think as much as we can do whatever part of the industry, to use our websites to do that, inform and educate, but also to do it in a welcoming way. And this is back to, I think, our role as a DMO. You know, as I say, everybody's interested in our marketing, and particularly private sector are interested in how much we're going to spend. Tourists are interested in what we're selling, and visitors are worried about what we're selling. But actually, that M for management around how we can support and educate the visitor and encourage and support the businesses at the same time, I think is critical.
Yeah, if I could come in, and I agree with Deirdre that, you know, the primary responsibility is on, you know, the general public, but we've got to do it in a soft touch way. I was always told that kind of people don't go on holiday to be told rules. You know, they go on holiday to relax, to get away from rules, to you know, to free themselves of everything. So I think a lot of it comes down to providing customers with the products, services, activities, whatever it is, that fit the rules, so that they don't have to have a decision or make a decision about something. It's just done automatically for them. And, you know, we've been doing this kind of through the outbreak, you know, with the distancing at tables, you know, all of this systems in place that businesses have to abide by the rules. So it takes that weight of responsibility off the customer, and so that they can have, you know, a good time, which is kind of what they're after, rather than being told, oh, you can't do that, oh, you can't do that. Just provide it in a way that the customer is automatically complying is the way to do it.
Emma Rees, you've got a question that's based on this. Would you like to ask that?
Yes, thank you. It's similar to Jack, really. I noticed Stage Holidays yesterday had released a statement requiring all of their customers to be vaccinated prior to travel unless they were exempt. And I thought, okay, is this kind of the way it will go with other companies? And, you know, do you think companies that facilitate travel into the UK, for instance, will that be beneficial for us? Will it be harmful to our country's tourism? Especially if testing can be implemented, which was something that Gloria touched on. And then in addition, do you think it should be necessary for domestic tourists to be vaccinated? So if I want to go to London from Blackpool, you know, should that be a necessity? Because potentially, you you're carrying a virus to another part of the country. And I just wondered your thoughts on that, really, because there's two sides to that, isn't there?
Thank you. Andrew, have you got any comments? Andrew's the representative from the World Travel and Tourism Council. Thank you.
Hi all, and on behalf of Gloria, thank you for having us here. I think it goes back to what she mentioned, that it's we can't afford to discriminate those that haven't been vaccinated yet, given the lack of supply that there are, and so we need testing on departure and all that entails. So we from the WTTC don't see that as a way of getting international travel started or domestic, and really don't call on our members in the private sector to do that, and rather have those testing protocols in place to get travel started. And just to go back to a couple of other questions that have been throughout the chat, throughout the different conversations, on the cruise industry, there was a couple of very good test cases over summer here in Europe. I think Chris asked a question around how that can get back on its feet. MSC Cruises, for example, tested all 20,000 of their customers on departure with no cases of COVID before, and then at the end they tested again and there were no cases at all. So there's very good data that they are developing out and proving to CDC and EDC around how they can get back on their feet. And one, I think Emma, you asked it around conferences, and Gloria mentioned it in her speech, is that we, WTTC, are going to host our global summit in Cancun just in about 8 weeks in a hybrid model. So this will be those folks on site will be in a bubble with testing very regularly with all the protocols and guidelines that we've been putting out and that other people have been implementing in place to show that this can happen, along with a very strong virtual aspect going forward. And then finally, around the 5-star hotels, I heard a few people highlighting that this has been one where they've seen great demand for it, and we've seen that as well. Those folks that can offer sort of outdoor experiences and sort of straight away COVID reduction rates have really seen a really strong summer last year, and looking forward to a lot of the pent up demand that Barrie, you mentioned, and that's really there on the global scale as well.
Donna has asked, any thoughts on the welcome from local communities in tourist areas when visitors do start to return? Might this be mixed between a welcome revival to the economy, but a nervousness around transmission, especially from some international visitors? Dimitrios, would you like to answer that one?
Well, I think what we see is in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of places around the world being very nervous with Chinese looking travelers. It didn't matter what's the nationality. It kind of mattered that they were Asian looking, and in the beginning they were really upset to welcome them. And I think over the summer, in Bournemouth, a lot of people were really upset to see a lot of domestic travelers coming for the day or a couple of days, kind of, and feeling really nervous. I think eventually when the vaccine is kind of coming out and we've got more herd immunity, I think we'll be in a position to make tourism more acceptable. Even when you walk around the streets and if you see a lot of people going together, you kind of, and people are very cautious and very stressed with this thing. And going back to the previous question about the vaccination and the passports or digital protocols or whatever, I think eventually this is going to happen, and this is going to be a prerequisite eventually. Like if you try to go to Africa right now, unless you've got a yellow fever vaccine, you cannot go. There is already precedence on those things. And I think eventually we're going to get to a situation. It's going to take some time because of the logistics of getting everybody vaccinated, but eventually we're going to get to that. So the sooner we kind of encourage everybody in the industry to vaccinate, and the sooner we've got more people vaccinated, the better it is. I just got the news as well that, let me see which country it is. Give me 1 second. I think it's
Dimitrios, why are you trying to search? I was just wondering on that topic of vaccinations and vaccine passports. Do you think quick testing, the kind of testing that provides an answer to whether you have the virus, in say 30 minutes or an hour, which I think are available, but at the moment are quite unreliable. Do you think that could be an alternative that could be used? I don't know if Adam, you've got any thoughts on that, Dimitrios.
I think they're complementary rather than alternative, and the tests have not been really reliable. And we had situations where people tested negative, then they were positive, then they were negative. You know, they were not really reliable. The other thing is that once you have got consumers into the mindset that they are traveling, where are you going to test them? At the airport? And what about if one member of the family is kind of tested positive? Are you going to stop everybody? Or, you know, it's kind of a mess. And you know, if we're talking about individual travelers and business travel, it can work. You know, you go for a meeting or something. But, you know, I think a lot of those things need to work together. And I think the more we kind of work together and the more we've got a seamless experience throughout, the better it is. But again, you know, you go to Heathrow and you're doing the test before you go. I mean, it may be like the new, after September 11, the security process changed, and maybe one more kind of step that you're gonna test, and to the degree that the tests are reliable, that may be a way. But I think we need a combination of all these things, and very quickly. And there are two issues here. One is political issue, because we have a lot of pressure from a lot of different kind of groups to kind of open up and do things. And the second thing is a business issue. And again, a lot of the businesses, they're really trying to restrict the number of conditions for traveling, which is totally understandable, but at the same time that will extend the period that COVID would be with us. Someone mentioned that in the beginning. I think Gloria mentioned that if we all wear masks and we all took measures, in 8 weeks we would have cleared everything. And that's the China environment. In the Western world, we're much more democratic and we've got many more rights. And that's why, you know, we are not getting rid of this problem. Have a look on Taiwan. Taiwan is the model country. They had 7 people who died in Taiwan so far. So Taiwan is the model country.
Thank you. I've got a question from Emma Thornton. It's nice to see you here today, Emma, and congratulations on your new role.
Hi there, Lydia. Hi. And it's lovely to see so many of my previous English colleagues on this call. Lovely to see you all. And it's been a really thought-provoking and stimulating webinar. So thank you, each and every one of the speakers, for the effort that you've put into it. It's really stimulated some good discussion and shared best practice. My question was for Deirdre, and apologies, Deirdre, I messaged you directly and was multitasking and had a whole load of typos and half the question came through, so I managed to get it right in the end. So it was around your discussion on Airbnb, and you were talking about the importance of really engaging Airbnb in the discussions locally at DMO level, and I just wanted to get other people's thoughts on how do we do that when it isn't a level playing field and where you have got a high proportion of small accommodation providers who do, and you have a local tension that arises from that. Just keen to understand those that have got a good dialogue going on between both sides of the fence.
Thanks, Emma, and really good to see you. And just a couple of thoughts. I'm sure colleagues will have some thoughts as well. I think one of the big opportunities, I mean, you know, very straightforwardly, the genie's out of the bottle on Airbnb. So wishing it was otherwise is probably, you know, which some operations do, is pointless, frankly. I think one of the things that's really interesting is the development of Airbnb Experience. So they are actively looking for opportunities to partner with other local businesses to be able to enhance the visitor stay. So I think engaging them in supporting the sort of wider visitor economy in the area will embed them and kind of mainstream them within the sort of stakeholder family of that destination, which I think is really, really key. I think the other thing is calling out any bad practice, making sure that they are, obeying by the regulations, and their visitors are, whether it's, rubbish disposal or, late night parties or whatever it is, that actually we call that out when we report it. Now, what the consequences can be, is patchy across the country. But I think, calling it out, they don't want, I think it's brand damage for them as well. But I think the first thing, Airbnb experience, I think, is a good way to get them engaged as much as possible.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Can I bring Chris Jackson in from the Cotswolds? He'd like to ask a question, please.
Well, I don't know if they're really questions or just observations. It's a bit of a tricky one. I think we're fairly atypical. When I hear about Bournemouth, I have more similarities with that, I think, than with a lot of the other comments. I mean, as an area, obviously, as a rural destination, the summer was incredible. My problems were mainly about the management of visitors to most areas. And it was interesting, the comments about giving them alternatives. That's fine, but obviously with day trips, I think a lot of them have no connection with us or with social media or anything else. So actually we've been looking at ways to manage them when they arrive. So actually, can we get them out of the really overcrowded areas in some way and get them moving? But I think the other thing, nobody's mentioned, but I think all of us have, as DMOs, have suffered from is how do we give the business support and communicate with the businesses when so many of the people we deal with have been furloughed or been made redundant? That's been a constant issue for us. And I think finally, and one that I found hardest is, as an area, whilst overall the summer was really good, there are obviously indoor attractions, etc., that all were really reliant on weddings or whatever it might be, or coach tourism, and those have really suffered. It's really hard to get the messaging and to keep people happy when you're getting a lot of pressure from local residents and from local councils to say, we don't want visitors, kind of thing. We had lots of cases of, locals telling visitors to F off, to put it at its mildest. I think we had about 20 cases that came to me, so God knows how many there were altogether. And I think, that I'm worried we're going to see that again as soon as the lockdown ends. And for us, it's a huge issue in getting that balance between the businesses who want to be promoted and the local communities that really are nervous about having people from outside in.
I don't think it'll be as bad this time, though. I think that, by the time we get to Easter, we'll have, 20 million vaccinations. So I think that from the summer, I think confidence will be a bit better. I think people will be a bit less nervous. I think things will, the vaccination program is the key to the whole thing. The speed of that, I think we'll get to that tipping point towards a herd immunity where everyone vulnerable is protected. I think that in itself will actually build confidence. And I think that I would hope there'll be less of what you're talking about this summer. That would be my view anyway.
Thank you for all your questions, and to all the speakers. As this is the first time I've hosted one of these events, I really want to be on time. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Jack to do his summary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia, and you've been an absolute professional today. As you say, you've come in bang on time. So thank you very much, firstly, to Lydia for excellently chairing this event. I think it's been a fantastic conversation. So thank you for everyone for getting involved. And once again, thank you to all the speakers for taking time out of your busy schedules, not just today, but also in planning for the event. So thank you very much. I will be in touch later on today just with the recording of the event, also a copy with the speakers' kind permission. I'll be sending a copy of all the PowerPoint presentations as well. Also the fantastic information that has been shared. I can see Dimitrios's research he's just put into there, so links to that that'll be shared as well. And thank you very much for being with us and making it a really fantastic event. Have a lovely day.